David is one of the bravest, strongest characters I have ever met. He is a man of few words, so it falls to me to tell his remarkable story. Let me tell you from the outset, I forgive you in advance if you don't believe me, but I swear on my grandfather's grave it's true. Okay, so he isn't dead yet, but you know what I mean. I've cobbled the story together from interviews with his wife, friends, and other townsfolk. I'm Mark, by the way, a reporter with the Houston Tribune. You'll notice that I didn't list David himself as a source of information. The reason for that is I only got him to speak to me once, and then all he said was, "My dad once told me, don't have anything to do nothing. Don't have anything to say nothing. That's all I did." I have enough material, and it is bizarre enough that I've decided to write a book. It will be as much about small-town dynamics as about infidelity and the actions of a remarkable man, a man of average intelligence who, when faced with the choices that the modern court system would give him, decided to fight back in his own way. For fairness, I should point out that this is my interpretation. As I said, David doesn't talk much. My main source was his wife. She talked like a canary, mainly, I think, for my promise of a couple of $1,000. She needed that to help with her legal bills. A little scene setting is in order at this point. At the beginning of this story, David and his wife lived in an isolated town of about 25,000 people with their 3 children. Sarah, 16, Jake, 15, and Liam, 13. David is a mechanic. His wife works for the biggest fish in their small pond. The man is an old-fashioned bully who owns the town's biggest car dealership. Everyone knows that the town's long-serving mayor is retiring next year, and our man is the leading contender to replace him, leading because all the other declared candidates withdrew their interest, citing personal reasons. Like I said, he's an old-style bully. The town has its own newspaper that until very recently showed absolutely no interest in the story of David and his wife. What can I say? The owner of the paper drives a car with a certain dealership sticker on the back window. I, on the other hand, work for a major newspaper based in the state capital. I was bullied at school, so even if this wasn't a great story, I would have tried to get involved in David's fight against Goliath anyway. Enough dribbling on with the story. Jessica screamed into the pillow under her face as the man above her unloaded into her. She was glad of that pillow. Faking the facial expressions as well would have been a task her acting skills just weren't up to. As she struggled to breathe under Sean's relaxed weight above her, she thought it hadn't always been like that. At the beginning of their relationship, the newness and the forbidden excitement of it all had resulted in genuine pleasure. Now, the familiarity of it all, the lack of romance, and the guilt robbed her of the sexual relief she craved. Sean was a fair enough lover with more than adequate equipment, but an hour snatched in a seedy motel just didn't do it for her. When she decided to start her affair 6 months ago, she dreamed that big, powerful Sean had a big, powerful tool, but it was so close to her husband David's in size that she couldn't tell the difference. At first, the novelty of it all had made it differently exciting, but without the long romantic build-up that late 30 SS women crave, the physical intimacy became mechanical. That would change, she knew. Sean was going places, and she intended to be there when he arrived there for the romantic dinners and the all-night love sessions she craved. She knew she didn't love Sean, but that was fine because she didn't love David either. It was enough for her to know that Sean loved her, and she reasoned she would come to love him in time. Only 3 things impinged on her perfect plans. One was her own guilt. Her strict Christian parents would never approve of her behavior and what she was doing and intended to do to David. She wasn't looking forward to that conversation with her husband. Although she didn't love him, she did respect him as a loyal, hard-working man trying to do the best for his family. It was just too bad that his best wasn't good enough for Jessica. Although the conversation was still a year away, she already dreaded it. The second was that Sean refused to divorce his frigid wife until he was actually elected mayor. That condemned her to occasional hurried motel liaisons rather than all-night sessions following a romantic date. Back in the present, as her sexual heat began to fade, her guilt started to build. Sean rolled off her and started to get dressed. As usual, she would take a shower and leave at least an hour after him. That way, no one would see them leave together or arrive back at work together. Sean finished dressing and kissed her goodbye. Before he opened the door, she reminded him, "Look out the window and make sure there's no one we know around." Sean obediently opened the curtains and glanced out, but suddenly drew back and let the curtain fall. "Hey, Jessica, there's a guy sitting on the hood of your car. He saw me open the curtain and looked at me." "What the hell?" Jessica jumped out of bed and opened the curtain a crack to peer surreptitiously out. "That's David, your husband?" "Yes. How the heck did he know I was here?" "I'm not ready for that conversation yet, Sean. This could wreck our plans." "How? What's he going to do?" "No divorce lawyer in this town is going to take his case. I'll word them up this afternoon, but he could go to the media." Sean laughed. "In this town? I don't think so. They're too smart to publish anything bad about me. They know I'll own this town for the next 10 years or until I make a run for state politics. Don't worry about them. Anyway, this could be good. You're always saying we never get enough time together. Now he knows. That could change. What's he going to do about it? I mean, look at the guy. He's half a foot shorter than me and about half my weight. He could tell your wife." "You're right there. I don't want the witch tipped off before we're ready. Tell you what, I'll go and have a talk to him." Sean bent down to kiss her again and marched out of the door. Jessica cracked the curtains again to see the confrontation. She looked straight into the eyes of her husband. Letting the curtain drop, she felt guilt eating at her. She waited a couple of minutes until she heard Sean's raised voice, then cracked the curtain again. What she saw was very upsetting. Sean was leaning over David, who still sat on her car. Once again, their eyes locked through the curtain. Jessica fled to the bathroom and showered until the water ran cold. Still, she hadn't managed to wash her guilt away. She was dressed and steeling herself to look out the window again when Sean rang. "How quickly did hubby leave after I had words with him?" "I don't know. I haven't looked since you left." With Sean bolstering her courage, Jessica looked out the cracked curtain again. He's still there. Sean was confused. His standover tactics always worked. Like most bullies, he only had one tactic. "What did you say to him?" "I just told him the facts of life and pointed out the health hazards of standing in our way and the futility of trying to do anything about it." "What am I going to do? I can't leave with him out there." "You'll be fine, Jessica. It'll be dark in an hour. Stay where you are, and I'll send a couple of our associates around to have a word with him." True to his word, an hour later, there was a heavy knock on her door. Jessica looked out and saw Rick and Tom, two of Sean's employees, outside the door holding David between them. They were so big that David's feet were off the ground. She opened the door, and they shuffled in. David had a neutral expression and just stared at Jessica. She quickly averted her eyes and made for the door when she heard a sickening thud behind her and an expulsion of breath. It was pure reflex to look. She saw Tom holding David and Rick with his fist cocked again. As she looked, David stood up straight again and looked her directly in the eye. Feeling sick, Jessica fled. She picked up some takeout on the way home to feed her family. She fielded questions on where their dad was and why he wasn't answering their phone calls. She slept extremely poorly, and there was still no sign of her husband when she left for work the next day. Sean wasn't in that day either, and she couldn't bring herself to speak to Rick or Tom. With extreme trepidation, Jessica returned home just after her usual time to an empty house. She rang Sarah and Jake, but both cells went straight to voicemail. Jessica began to fret. It was well after dinner time when she heard a car in the driveway. Looking out the window, she saw her kids getting out of her parents' car with both her mom and dad. They trooped in. Her mother opened the conversation. "Jessica, why didn't you tell us David was in the hospital?" Two didn't know. Silence settled on the room. Everyone stared at Jessica. Finally, her father broke it. "Maybe you didn't know, but the fact that you're not rushing over there or even curious about why he's there tells me it's no surprise to you." Faced with this logic and 5 suddenly accusing stares, Jessica could only slump into a chair and avert her eyes. She might as well have screamed, "Guilty!" After another minute's silence, She fled to her room. She heard her parents making dinner for her children. Her mother tried to get her to come out of the locked room, but Jessica couldn't face that. Eventually, when all was silent downstairs, she ventured out. The hum of her children's conversation abruptly stopped when she entered the room. "Have you all eaten dinner?" Her children just stared silently at her. Finally, Sarah broke it. "Mom, you know how Daddy got hurt, don't you? I had no idea he was in the hospital." Silence returned as everyone, except maybe little Liam, accepted that the lack of a denial was as good as an admission. This time it was broken by Liam's sobs. Jessica hurried over and wrapped her arms around him. "What's wrong, sweetie? It hurt me to see Daddy hurt so much. He's got broken ribs, a broken nose, and 2 black eyes." Jessica recoiled in horror at what she'd not prevented. Jake filled the ensuing silence. "Why did you hurt Daddy, Mom? What did he do to you?" Jessica's answer was pure reflex. "He didn't do anything to me." Too slowly, she realized that once again she'd failed to deny being the one that hurt David. In her own mind, she blamed herself. She shepherded the children to bed and basically drank herself unconscious. The next day, Sean refused to discuss David at work, but offered to discuss it at their usual motel later. Frustrated, Jessica agreed. As soon as she got there, he tried to fondle her, but she snapped at him until he stopped. He just shrugged his shoulders when she asked him what instructions he'd given his 2 thugs. When she described David's injuries, Sean showed no interest or empathy at all. She stormed out and arrived back at the office 2 minutes before him. The tension between them for the rest of the day was obvious to everyone within 100 yards. That night, she didn't fret when her children weren't home before her again. Her parents dropped them off, but as soon as they smelled dinner cooking, they left without a word. All the children gave monosyllabic answers to any question she asked. Whenever she entered the room they were in, conversation ceased. The next day, things were still frosty at work and very uncomfortable at her empty home. That night, she just sat at the kitchen table and pondered how to break the impasse with her children. She was so deep in thought that she hardly registered her children returning. And when no dinner was present, Sarah and Jake prepared a meal around her. She only snapped out of it when Sarah noisily put a plate in front of her. She ate alone in the kitchen while the children ate in front of the TV. She just couldn't handle those accusing stares. She shuddered to think what David was filling their heads with. After another cold day at work, she returned home to a bustling house. Her mother greeted her at the door. "Are you going to feed your children today?" "Of course, Mother." "Good." Her mother interrupted and left the house. Jessica turned to see Liam carrying a plate of cheese and biscuits up the stairs. "Hey, no food upstairs, you know that." "Daddy's hungry." Liam threw over his shoulder as he kept on up the stairs. That's how Jessica discovered David was home. She busied herself making dinner, occasionally glancing at the stairs. It was only 13 steps, but it was a psychological chasm. At any one time, 1 or 2 of the children were upstairs. Sarah took David's food up. As they sat at the dining table, Liam innocently asked, "If Daddy didn't do anything to you, why did you hurt him? Why won't you talk to him?" Jessica had no answer to that. When Sarah started to explain the concept of guilt to Liam, she fled, leaving a half-eaten dinner. Jessica walked for several hours. When she returned, all the kids were in bed. She needed stuff from the master bedroom and bathroom, so she snuck upstairs and peered in the open door. David appeared to be asleep on his side, facing the doorway. The sight of his swollen face with white strips holding his nose in place bypassed everything and went straight to her conscience. The sound of ragged breathing just about killed her. Jessica gathered her necessities as quietly as possible and went to put them in the spare room directly across the hall. She returned to the master bedroom with the intent of whispering a request for forgiveness to the man she'd once loved, a man whose current mental and physical pain she could have prevented. As she knelt down next to the bed, she saw his eyes were open and staring at her. She fled again that night and again couldn't sleep. Through 2 walls in a corridor, she felt David's eyes boring into her. When her relationship with Sean first turned serious, she knew conflict with David was inevitable. She'd gone over and over in her head what she would say to David. Now that it had turned from an academic exercise to reality, It hit harder than she'd ever imagined. Jessica forced Sean to talk to her the next morning and tried to get him to advance his plans to divorce his wife. He was adamant that until after the election there would be no divorce and no admitting to an affair. If she wanted to divorce her husband now, it was up to her. He would assist her with time off and money, but essentially she was on her own. That's when Jessica first suspected that she might just be a distraction for Sean. Although she was far from convinced, the heat from the burning bridge behind her forced her to follow her chosen path. She took time off to see a lawyer and arranged to have David served as soon as the papers were ready. She left the service all in the hands of the lawyer to expedite the divorce. She kept her demands reasonable, her having primary custody, but with liberal visitation rights for him, and the formulated child support and alimony. She also wanted residency of the house until she was ready to move out. That should be just after the election next year. The next part of the story won't make sense unless you know the layout of the dealership that Sean owns and Jessica works at. The front of the building is a huge showroom. Along the wall at the back are 4 glass-walled offices, end-to-end with solid walls between them. On the far right is Sean's, then Jessica's, then the 2 belonging to the admin manager and the service manager. As the offices are long and thin, there is only one place to put a desk at the opposite end to the door, against the end wall. Because Sean's and Jessica's doors are at opposite ends of their offices, this means their desks are basically together with a solid wall between them. The service center is around the back, and Jessica didn't see David walk into the dealership. She was busy tapping away at a keyboard. In he did walk, though, right up to the reception desk. He leaned on it and just stared right into Jessica's window. One of the 2 receptionists recognized him. He'd coached her softball team in high school. She knew he was Jessica's husband, although he'd never been there before. She tried to engage him in conversation, but he just stared neutrally at the offices. The receptionist couldn't see if it was Jessica or Sean that was the target. While she kept talking, the other girl who shared the front desk went to Jessica's office and told her David was there. Jessica's head swung around. From her vantage point, there was no doubt where David's eyes were focused. They bored into hers even from a distance of 12 feet. Jessica quickly broke eye contact. Still, she felt his gaze on her. Without looking, she reached for the Venetian blind control and twisted it so he couldn't see her now. A minute later, she put one finger between 2 slats and peeked out. Both the girls at reception were whispering to each other conspiratorially. David was still staring at her window with his now familiar neutral expression playing through the bruises and bandages. With his stare burning through the blinds, Jessica picked up the phone and rang Sean. She told him to look out his window. "What's he doing here?" "I don't know, Sean. Get rid of him. It hurts." Sean put the phone down and strode out to the reception desk. "Mr. Miller, this is a private business. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." David didn't acknowledge Sean in any way, shape, or form. He just kept staring. "Come on, don't make me call the police." Without taking his eyes off Jessica's window, David reached into his pocket and handed his phone to Sean. Sean lowered his voice to a level he thought was audible only to the starer. "Listen, so I slept with your wife. Get over it." The trouble was, Sean had no idea of the power of his own voice. Both girls at the desk heard his comment clearly. In her office, Jessica, peeking through a crack in the Venetians, saw both heads swing towards her. She then saw Sean stride back to his office. 2 minutes later, she heard a commotion at reception. She created another crack and looked out. What she saw horrified her. Rick and Tom had David by an arm each and were carrying him towards the outer doors. David was traveling backward and stared at her the entire trip. Out of sight, Jessica thought to herself, serves him right. Why can't he just let me go? Then she remembered that all her dialogues with David to date had been in her head. Until he'd caught her in the motel with Sean, he had no idea that their marriage was even in trouble. With that amount of shock, it was no wonder he was at a loss for words. She wasn't totally devoid of empathy, and she genuinely felt for David. Jessica raced to her door and exited her office. She saw Sean with a sadistic grin on his face. "No, Sean, no, not again. Jessica, let me handle it, woman." With this statement, Sean gestured with his head for Jessica to return to her office. She opened the blinds again and stewed. Sean canceled his afternoon appointments and just stayed in his office. Jessica noted that there was a constant stream of employees hitting reception, and many small clusters formed and dispersed. She distracted herself from wondering what that was all about. At 1 p.m., 2 policemen arrived and spoke to the receptionist. Sean must have seen them. They were invited to his office. The blinds were closed. Then they left. Jessica was dreading going home. So before she left, she asked if she could move into the motel unit the company rented permanently, the same unit she and Sean used. She snuck home before the kids got back from school and packed a suitcase. Then she sent a text to David and Sarah's phone saying she wouldn't be home. At the end of the day, Sean helped her unpack in the unit. Desperate for distraction, she allowed him to have a physical relationship with her. At 6:30 p.m., her mother rang. Before she answered, Jessica thought, typical of David to use her own family against her. "Where the hell are you, Jessica? Why aren't you home to feed your kids?" I'm not coming home tonight. David can look after them. David is in the hospital again. He'll be there for at least a week this time." "What? I'll be home as quick as I can." Jessica pushed Sean off. "What did you do to him this time? The stubborn prick has to learn that he can't mess with me, Jessica." Jessica dressed quickly and sprinted home, picking up takeout on the way. The first thing she noted when she threw her front door open was all 3 children sobbing in the lounge, being comforted by her parents. Her mother intercepted her and led her into the kitchen. "What the hell is going on, Jessica? You abandon our children while your husband is in the ICU?" Jessica watched her mother's nostrils flare. "Then you come home with grease for your children's main meal of the day. What is going on, Jessica?" "It's none of your business, Mother. David and I are going through a rough spot at the moment, that's all." The 2 women stared each other down for half a minute. Her mother broke the silence first. "I note that you showed no surprise when you found out your husband is in the hospital. That tells me that what the children say is true. You did have something to do with David ending up in the ICU." "No, Mom, I had no idea David was in the hospital again." Silence settled over the conversation again. Again, it was broken by Jessica's mother. Well, what? Aren't you a little curious what your boyfriend did to your husband this time?" "What boyfriend?" "Come on, Jessica, you reek of sex." Jessica looked at the floor and remained silent. "Well, seeing as how you were so interested, I'll tell you. This time the doctors are fairly certain he has a fractured cheekbone and possibly a fractured skull as well. They are sure that one of the ribs that were broken last time was pushed into his chest this time and punctured a lung. The ambulance driver told me they picked him up from an alley near your work. Tell me, Jessica, what did the poor guy do to you to deserve this treatment?" Jessica couldn't answer. She was too busy sobbing. Her mother sat in silence until Jessica ran upstairs to her bedroom. She noticed there was blood on the sheets of the bed she hadn't slept in for 4 days. She screamed her hurt into the pillow. She had no idea how long she stayed there, but finally there was a soft knock at the door. It was her mother. "I have to take Dad home. All this stress is causing his blood pressure problems to come back. He almost fainted when he stood up just now." "Okay, Mom, I'll see you out." By the time Jessica got downstairs, her father was walking out the front door. He turned to give her a withering look, but didn't say anything. While she was saying goodbye, the children slipped off to bed. Jessica sat and tried to think of a way out of this train wreck. The only way she could see was forward. Breakfast the next day was silent. When she got to work, Jessica discovered Sean would be gone for the day. She desperately needed reassurance that at least the future side of her plan was on track, so she texted Sean and begged him to meet her at the motel that evening. She then texted her mother and asked her to meet the kids after school and look after their dinner as she had things to do. The reply was, "Yes, good idea." Sean met her after work and reassured her their plan was right on track. The police couldn't connect either of them to David's 2 beatings. He didn't bring up the subject of her husband's second assault. Sure, Sean had arranged it, but she could have stopped it simply by running after them as her husband was carried out the door. She allowed Sean to be with her until after 9 p.m. Then Jessica showered and went home. Although it was almost 10 when she arrived, all 3 children were awake and looking at her expectantly. "Why aren't you guys in bed?" her mother replied on their behalf. "I let them stay up until you got home. They're keen to know how their father is." 3 don't know. "What, didn't you go and see him tonight?" Jessica's silence answered for her. "So, what did you do?" "Surely not." "Tell me you didn't get me to cover you here while you went to see your lover while David is in the hospital. I never told you I was going to the hospital." Her mother swung around, grabbed her coat, and headed for the door. With one hand on the handle, she threw over her shoulder, "You disgust me. I'm ashamed to call you my daughter. Don't ask me to look after your children again unless it's so you can go to your husband and beg his forgiveness." Jessica thought she was learning to cope with 3 hours of broken sleep at night. Like I said, I never got to know David, but from how other people describe him, he maybe would have forgiven Jessica up to this point if she had just abandoned her plans. She didn't. From what she told me later, she thought she caused so much pain at that point that backing out would have made it all pointless. When Jessica's mother rang her at work the next day, she thought it might be to apologize. It wasn't. "Jessica, how could you be that heartless?" "What are you talking about, Mom? Your husband finally gets out of the ICU, and what does he get? A visit from his loving wife? No, he gets an ugly process server and divorce papers. Who are you, Jessica? What have you done with my daughter?" In her pain, Jessica had totally forgotten that her divorce process was on autopilot. The lawyer had obviously followed her instructions and had David served as soon as the papers were ready. As a reflex, she tried to remove the immediate thorn in her side. "Mom, can you look after the kids tonight so I can go and see David?" "No, I bloody can't, Jessica. Your father is in the same hospital as your husband. He had a heart attack today. They're going to put in stents tomorrow. Goodbye, Jessica." Jessica rushed home early to be there when the children got off the school bus. The bus arrived devoid of 3 familiar faces. Again, calls to 2 of their phones went straight to voicemail. 2 hours later, she got a text to pick them up at the hospital. They'd all walked there after school. On the way home, she scolded them for making her worry. They all just remained silent and stared out the car window. It was shortly after this that I became aware of the tragic story of Jessica, David, and Sean. I was sitting in my office wondering where my next story was going to come from. The world was going through an unusually quiet, peaceful period, and news was hard to find. My phone rang. It was an old mate I'd gone to journalism school with, Matt Johnson. He was good at what he did, but tended to shun the bigger organizations to concentrate on small-town issues where he could make a difference. He'd been in the regional center where our story occurred for about a year. The doctors and nurses at the hospital where David was being treated were so appalled by his wife's behavior that they contacted Matt. With his normal talent, Matt quickly spoke to several people from the dealership and found out about Jessica and Sean's affair in addition to the 2 beatings David had suffered. No one came out and directly said it, but the fact that David was seen by 3 witnesses being carried out of the dealership by 2 known associates of Sean led to its own conclusion. Matt tried to talk to David, but he refused to speak. He then contacted the police to see where their investigation was at, only to be told there was no active investigation on the matter. He submitted the story to his editor and had the pleasure of seeing it torn up in his face. No negative stories would be published about Sean in that town. He immediately resigned and sent the story to me. I saw my editor, and Matt received an offer from my paper. The next week, I cleared my desk and left for an assignment in Centerville 2 days later. From what Jessica told me, the next week was a very uncomfortable one for her. Her children treated her like a leper, and her social life was curtailed by not having her mother available to look after the children. She picked them up from the hospital every night. Sean was away on business every day during business hours, and the only time she saw him was one night when he managed to sneak into her house after the children were in bed. That was the first time they spent the whole night together. She certainly craved the company. On Friday, Jessica got a call from the school to come in for a semi-urgent discussion. That was when she found out that they were very worried about Sarah's rapid weight loss and couldn't believe she'd been so negligent not to notice. They moved on to tell of Jake's sudden propensity for violence and that little Liam was being bullied because he was always crying. Jessica cried herself at that. All she could think to do was advance the divorce as quickly as possible and hope it blew over. At first, Jessica turned down the invitation to go out with 4 of her girlfriends that Friday night. David was still in the hospital and Sean was unavailable. She tried everything she could to get the children to speak, but failed. In frustration, she left the children at home and went out with the girls. She left the name of the place she would be with Sarah in case it was too loud to hear her cell ringing. She'd been there about an hour, fielding questions from her friends that had heard the rumors, denying all knowledge of the violence visited on her husband. They'd finally relented and moved on to more fun topics when she saw 2 of them looking over her shoulder. She turned around, and there was David. One eye was slightly black, the other jet black. A bandage covered one side of his face below the eye, and he was stooped, guarding his painful ribs. He was sitting at an adjacent table, just staring at her. In panic, Jessica swung around back to her friends and totally blew it. "Oh, ignore him." Her friends saw her immediate facial reaction and heard her flippant comment. They also saw David suffering and could only wonder at the commitment it must have taken to come there and make his silent protest. For that, it clearly was. They made up their own minds on Jessica's honesty over the last hour. One made an excuse to go to the bar. The 2 that knew David the best went over to talk to him. The 4 just looked at Jessica quizzically. Jessica fled again. She paused outside the bar, wondering if she should offer David a lift. Her own conscience wouldn't allow her to talk to him yet, though. Even though it was the decent thing to do, she just couldn't do it. As late as 2 weeks ago, she told the guy she loved him to divert any suspicion. He now knew it had been a lie. Jessica drove home. Her mother was there looking after the kids. They hadn't seen each other in a week, and Jessica suddenly realized she'd never even inquired about her father's health. God, how self-centered had she become? They both got the kids to bed. Then Jessica asked about her father, but tried to change the topic when her mother raised the thorny issue of David. Her mother was having none of that, though. She asked Jessica if David had done anything to warrant her divorcing him. Jessica mentioned a couple of petty little niggles, but when she saw her mother was unconvinced, she went on to explain that she'd simply fallen out of love with her husband and in love with someone else. She found lying to her mother easy. She certainly wasn't going to mention that she used Sean's attention to her as an opportunity to trade up, as it were. The older generation woman let her daughter have it on her opinions about abandoning her marriage and children. No holds were barred. Jessica sat through it uncomfortably. She vehemently denied having anything to do with David's 2 beatings. At the end, she didn't ask whether or not her mother had discussed with her husband if he would forgive her for the attack on their marriage. In her mind, the plan was intact. She did ask if David was coming home that night and was coldly told that he was due to be released in 2 days, but had rung asking where she was earlier. She realized that David must have snuck out of the hospital to go to the bar earlier. Jessica did a lot of thinking in the next 2 days. She decided that the decent thing to do was apologize to David for her infidelity, but to point out that the beatings were the result of his own immature behavior. She would demand that he spoke to the children and explained that she had nothing to do with his pain. She thought there was a reasonable chance he would go along with that, and a small chance he'd beg her to stay. One thing was for sure, any aggression on his part would result in threats of a reduced share of the marital assets in the split. David had other plans. On the night he was released from the hospital, Jessica and Sean left work early and went to the unit. With no need for secrecy, they both walked out of the room together just after 6 p.m. to be greeted by a silent David, Sarah, Jake, and Liam watching them from where they stood across the parking lot. Sean immediately strode towards them. All 3 children stepped in front of David. David said something Jessica couldn't hear, then stepped in front of them protectively. Sean looked at the three witnesses, turned, and strode away. Jessica slunk to her car and drove away. David took the kids out for a meal and returned to his home with them just before 8. Jessica heard them come in laughing and talking. She kept washing her dinner dishes. When she'd finished, she went into the lounge, meaning to separate David from the kids and present her ultimatum. The three children stopped talking when she entered. There was no sign of David. When she inquired where he was, she was told that he'd taken his pain medicine and gone to bed. She tried in vain to get the kids to talk to her normally. That failed. She shepherded them to bed and rang Sean for comfort. Exhausted, she decided to turn in early as well. At the top landing of the stairs, she saw the light was on in the spare room and that there was a pile of her clothes and her toiletries on the bed. Vowing that this had to stop now, she strode to the master bedroom door. It was locked. Going back downstairs, she retrieved the spare key from the kitchen, thinking how David was behaving totally unlike the man she knew. She armed herself with a rolling pin for self-defense, just in case. Using the key, she opened the bedroom door. The light from the hallway revealed David on the bed in a sleeping bag on a mattress. As she was processing the sight, the form in the bag arose to reveal Jake standing between her and David. Jake looked at the rolling pin, then hissed forcefully, "You will not hurt my dad again." Jessica wanted to say it was all a mistake, that she wouldn't ever hurt David. In Jake's eyes, she saw the futility of this. Instead, she retreated, weeping, to her room. Did she sleep like a baby that night? What do you reckon? David was still unconscious when it was time to leave the next morning. The kids took turns. Two would be eating breakfast in the kitchen. The other would be sitting halfway up the stairs. It was so obvious that this one was a guard that it broke Jessica's heart. She left and spent the day planning a speech on how to redeem her children's trust. She returned home at her usual time. David and the children were talking in the lounge. She barked at the kids to go into the kitchen. They looked at David, who nodded. When he painfully started to rise, she ordered him to stay away. Once the three children were settled at the kitchen table, Jessica stood glaring down at them, facing the door, the table between her and it. She opened her mouth to begin her prepared speech when she saw her tormentor standing just outside the doorway. Almost 2 weeks of guilt, self-loathing, frustration, and sleep deprivation caused something inside Jessica to flip. The neutral expression on David's face was the final straw. On pure reflex, Jessica destroyed the remnants of her life. With a strength she didn't know she had, she picked up the heavy glass fruit bowl in the center of the table and hurled it towards her tormentor. It slipped in her hand at the last moment, which caused her aim to be off. In slow motion, she saw the bowl heading for the doorframe. Just before it struck, she looked at David's face. She swears now that the neutral expression turned to a smile. That was his only muscle movement, however. As the heavy bowl hit the frame, it broke into 2 pieces. One piece smashed harmlessly against the frame knot, so the other piece. It deflected about 30 degrees and hit the undamaged side of David's face. Still in slow motion, Jessica watched in horror as bright crimson blood sprayed out of a deep cut before her husband sank slowly to his knees, then fell onto his side. Like a sick film projector, life sped up again. The children, initially stunned to silence, started shouting concurrently. Jake reacted first. He jumped up and protectively stood over his father. Seeing the blood still pulsing from David's face, Jessica instinctively grabbed a hand towel and rolled it up while striding to her recumbent husband. She intended to use it to staunch the blood. Jake raised his hands to ward her off, but she determinedly pushed him backward. He fell hard. Jessica knelt down and pressed the towel into David's face. In a very ungirlish manner, Sarah tackled her mother off her father. Seeing that his angry sister was more than a match for his mother, Jake arose, went to the medicine cabinet, grabbed a sterile pad, ripped it open, and applied it gently to his father's face. Sarah screamed at Liam, "Phone emergency!" Knowing how bad this was, Jessica ran to the phone. By controlling the call, she hoped to just request an ambulance while keeping the police away. She had just put her hand on the phone when she heard Jake scream, "Use the phone upstairs, Sarah!" In a moment of clarity, Jessica realized that they'd misinterpreted her actions as her wanting to stop the phone being used. Sarah sprinted past her towards the stairs. Jessica wanted to give chase, but little Liam stopped her the only way he could. He wrapped his arms around her lower legs. Jessica wanted to take one step but fell heavily when her legs wouldn't move. She lay there, screaming hysterically. Then she removed Liam's arms, firmly stood, and ran. That's the first time I saw Jessica in the flesh-on hand covered in blood running to her car. I had just arrived to request an interview. Seeing the bloody, screaming woman, I took the liberty of inviting myself in and took over David's treatment. The ambulance arrived, followed by the police. While David was taken away, the police started asking questions. I arranged for Sarah to ring her grandmother to come and look after them. That's how I heard firsthand what had happened to David this time. As the children recounted how their mother had attacked their father, then allegedly tried to smother him and stop them from calling an ambulance, I'd interviewed enough people by now to suspect that the local police might be a little less than zealous in protecting David's interests. So I rang a contact in the state police, and within 3 hours, 2 flying squad members turned up. The flying squad are a group of police that move from town to town, accepting that the local force can sometimes go a little native. The flying squad come into a town, blitz the local bad drivers for a few days, then move on. I stayed long enough to see the children giving their statements all over again, then took Sarah and Jake to see their dad. That's when I got my only words ever from him. I took them home and bowed out. Unbeknownst to me at the time, Jessica fled to Sean's house. She was greeted at the door by his wife, Pam. Sean, thinking quickly, explained to his wife that Jessica was an employee of his with an abusive husband. The generous woman offered her house as a refuge for the night. Jessica was too distraught to go to work the next day, but Sean did, leaving the women alone. Just after lunchtime, Pam was in the kitchen but ran into the lounge when she heard a scream and a crash. Jessica was lying on the floor in a dead faint. Looking around to see what may have caused it, Pam eventually looked out the window. There was a man whose face was almost entirely covered in bandages, standing outside their fence, staring at the house. Pam waited for Jessica to start coming around, then asked what was happening. Through Jessica's incoherent mumbling, Pam caught the word husband. She called the police to remove the abusive man, then called Sean. Sean got there first and strode into the house, ignoring David to start damage control. The police arrived and recognized David. One came to the door and asked Pam if it was her. Pam innocently said yes. To her amusement, Jessica was arrested. To avoid answering difficult questions from his wife, Sean left to organize a lawyer for Jessica. He had to keep a lid on this whole mess. He went back home very soon afterward when Pam rang to say the creepy man was still staring at their house. On the way home, he hatched a plan, one that involved waiting for darkness. He kept Pam entertained all afternoon. I was at the police station after learning of the morning's drama over the police radio, trying to get details of what Jessica would be charged with. They weren't very talkative. I then spent a couple of hours trying to locate David with no luck there either. Finally, I went back to the motel and started to type up the story while eavesdropping on the police radio channel. That's how I located David just after dark. Sean must have rung the police to move David on. I heard them being dispatched to Sean's residence. I jumped in my car and got there just as the police were watching David get in his car and drive off. This guy seemed to attract trouble, so I decided to follow him. I was within sight of his house when he pulled into his driveway and painfully climbed out. I saw 2 shadows detach themselves from trees and close in behind him. One raised an arm and hit David on the back of the head with something. I didn't wait any longer but gunned the engine and bathed the scene with my headlights. I snapped a couple of photos with my ever-present camera. 2 large men ran off up the street, leaving a motionless David behind. I called the ambulance and police again and waited for poor old David to be carted off to the hospital for the 4th time in 2 weeks. I suspected that David wouldn't be able to survive many more episodes like this. What I'd witnessed wasn't the prelude to a beating, but something much more serious. I gave a statement to the flying squad police and handed over my photographs. David spent another night in the hospital while being checked out for yet another concussion. I was in court the next day when the judge arraigned Jessica for assault occasioning grievous bodily harm. The police let it be known that attempted murder might be added later. Sean posted her bail, gave her a wad of cash, and took her to their motel unit. He suggested she throw her phone away, as there was a fair chance that was how David was tracking her. He also requested that apart from at work, she stay the hell away from him. With an out-of-town reporter sniffing around, well, he just didn't need the bad publicity. Jessica was shocked. Sean was all she had left from her old life and the cause of it all going to pieces. She asked how he could treat her so badly if he loved her. Sean couldn't help the look of contempt that suffused his face. In that instant, Jessica realized that far from loving her, she'd just been a bit of fun for him on the side, a bit of fun that was now a big liability. To confirm this, Sean told her rather coldly what her life would be like if she tried to make waves for him. Then he left. He had an urgent job to do. His hired hands weren't answering their phones. Jessica stewed on the train wreck that her life had become and the fact she'd lost absolutely everything. She didn't even have a medicine cabinet full of pills or a bath to end it all in. She was cheered up somewhat 2 days later when Sean was arrested. My photographs of the night of David's final assault led to his thugs being apprehended very quickly. To save their own skin, they rolled over on Sean immediately. Now his power and influence worked against him, and he was denied bail. When my article was published in the weekly magazine that weekend, his wife left him quicker than a rat on the Titanic. The dealership survived, however, and Jessica continued her lonely existence until her trial. She brokered an uneasy deal with her mother to get her stuff from her old house, but never saw David or her children again. Jessica was honest when the police, tipped off by my article, questioned her about David's first 2 beatings, thinking they had nothing to do with her. That led to her being charged with 2 counts of failure to report a crime and as an accessory to assault. David was granted interim custody of their 3 children. He was torn about pressing charges on Jessica's direct assault of him. His mind was finally made up by child services. One particularly militant local officer took Jessica's side and started proceedings to get custody granted to her. This was despite the wishes of all 3 children. David, realizing that himself having custody was in the best interests of the kids, went ahead and pressed charges on the grounds of maximizing the chances of the correct result being forthcoming. When the child support worker persisted, David took to sitting outside her house, staring at it. Although the police moved him on, it had the desired result. Soon, neighbors reported loud arguments coming from the house. Her husband was heard to scream, "Let me get this straight. The witch ambushes the guy, fools around on him, sits back and does nothing when he's put in the hospital twice, then tries to kill him in front of the kids, and you still take her side." An hour after this exchange, the government worker was seen lugging suitcases to her car. The case was dropped. Jessica still hadn't worked up the courage to end it all when the circuit court came to town. With the evidence so overwhelming, all 4 parties pled guilty. Rick and Tom got 3 years, Jessica got 4, and Sean 8. No one was there to see Jessica taken from the dock down the special stairs to the holding cells. It wasn't until this point that the full reality hit her. She wrote a long letter to her children, apologizing for what she'd done to their family. She wrote another to David. It contained no apologies, things were way too bad for that, but did beg him to look after the children. David became somewhat of a local celebrity and had no shortage of attention from the local available ladies. He even went out on dates when family business allowed, or when Sarah and Jake gave him no choice. When one particular lady caught his eye, Sarah and Jake confronted her alone one night and gave her a thorough grilling, at the end of which they pronounced her worthy of continuing to see their courageous dad. Things are still going well with her, and Sarah is thinking of dropping hints to David about proposing. As for Sean, what can I say? He was in a 4-person cell and was quickly learning that being a small-town bully didn't amount to much in the state prison. He was also starting to feel like an unsuccessful heavyweight boxing contender. He was certainly being badly battered about the ring. A few days later, he was involved in a prison fight. Well, that was his last fight. Apparently, trying to bully a 350-pound man is never a good idea. Thank you for tuning in to this intense story of betrayal, resilience, and justice. What would you have done if you were in David's situation? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking tales like this one. See you in the next video. I watched her walk up the 3 steps to the entrance of the building, stopping on the landing and speaking into what seemed like an intercom before reaching for the entrance door. Even from where I stood, I could hear the buzz releasing the lock. She went inside, still carrying the tube, stood in the foyer, and pulled out her phone. She made a call, surprising me when my own phone didn't ring. She spoke for several minutes, then walked over to the stairway and began to climb. His room was on the 2nd floor. Her step was quick, indicating she knew where she was going. Now it would finally be over. As I watched her disappear up the stairway, I thought back to that day when everything I thought was good in my life changed. It happened so long ago, and I was surprised that the sight of my wife cheating on me would bring it all back again, so clear that it seemed it had only happened yesterday. But that wasn't true. It happened almost 20 years ago, but the lessons I learned then have guided my life up until this point. As a matter of fact, what I had done up to this point was assured by that event so long ago. I really had no choice, and Jennifer should understand that. Well, maybe she did, and she was just playing out her role in this little drama. Let me tell you about it, and then maybe you'll understand. When it began, I was 11 years old, and I lived with my parents, Lisa and Mark Johnson, in Denver, Colorado. My name is David, after my grandfather. My dad owned a used car dealership, and he did well enough that we lived in a nice home in one of the many suburbs around the capital city of Colorado. Mom was a school teacher, and she taught English to high school kids. It was the summer, Mom was not working, and I was out of school and playing baseball with the Little Leagues. We had a game scheduled that afternoon, but the team we were to play had to forfeit for some reason. A win was a win, so the coach took us all out for ice cream and then sent us home. I was about 2 hours early, so I decided to go home and maybe find my best buddy, Mike Harris, and see what trouble we could get into. Mike didn't play sports because he had a bad knee, but he was my best friend. All I had to do was change out of my uniform, and then I would go find him. I went into the house thinking of what I wanted to do when Mike and I got together and ran up the stairs to my room. As I pounded down the hall, I glanced into Mom and Dad's room and saw Mom on the bed naked, a man I had never seen before on top of her. I stopped in shock and just stared. Yeah, I knew what sex was. I had seen some porn already, and I knew what men and women did, and Mike and I had experimented a little with ourselves. I had listened to the sounds that came from my parents' room late at night when I was supposed to be asleep. It was all just stuff kids did, but it was enough for me to understand what Mom was doing, and that she was doing it with someone other than Dad. As I stood there, shocked just holding me in place, Mom must have heard something and raised her head. As she saw me, her eyes widened, her mouth fell open, and one hand came up to cover herself. Our eyes locked, and she could see the surprise and the hurt that came into mine. Somehow, my 11-year-old brain understood that our lives were going to change forever. It also understood that this change wasn't going to be a good thing. Oh God, David, please, honey, just wait there till I can come out. Please wait for me, okay? She pushed the man on top of her to the side and scrambled off the bed, trying to cover herself as she flailed around looking for a robe or something to cover her nakedness, never letting go of me with her eyes. The man was yelling at her, not understanding what had happened. He grabbed her and she slapped him with a loud crack, yelling, "Let me go! Let me go!" As she turned away from me, the spell was broken and I turned and ran down the stairs and out the door, never pausing or looking back. The sight of my naked mother lying under another man burned into my 11-year-old brain. I ran and ran until I had no breath left to run. I found myself walking slowly along a single-lane road that led out of town, and I stopped, trying to locate where I was. I saw a small gas station and convenience store just ahead, and realized I had run for almost 5 miles before stopping. I went in, bought a soda and a bag of chips, and then began the long walk back. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I was sure I didn't want to talk to my mother. She had cheated on my dad, and I loved my dad more than life itself. He was my hero, my mentor, and my rock. What she did made me mad, madder than I had ever been at either one of my parents. We had the usual little spats that meant nothing, but this one was different. Things would never be the same, and I knew that, and it was her fault. It was dark when I finally walked up the path to my home. I stopped at the door, hesitating to go in, not knowing what I would find. I opened the door and walked in to find my mother and father sitting in the living room waiting for me apart inside. So please don't say anything, okay? I made the decision at that instant that I would not say anything to my father. She was right, it would only hurt him, and he didn't deserve that. So I raised my eyes to meet those of my mother and told her, I promise I won't say anything to him ever. She stood, came over to me, and kissed the top of my head. Thank you, David, and I promise you never again. She waited for me to say something, but I remained silent. She seemed uncertain of what more to say, and I said nothing, so she finally made some noises about eating some dinner and walked out, closing the door behind her. One thing I didn't tell her then, that she would come to understand later. I promised to stay quiet, but I never promised to forgive her. And I never did. Life went on for us. I had no idea what my mother did when I wasn't around, but from that day forward I treated her as a cook, a maid, a companion for my father, but never again as my mother. She came to understand, and it slowly took its toll on her. She became quiet. She began to go to bed earlier and earlier, and sometimes she failed to get up until late morning. She resigned her teaching job and stayed home. The only time she seemed active and alert was when Dad was home. I watched as she treated my dad as a king, always asking what she could do for him, trying to please him as often as she could, in general working to keep the house perfect for us. When we were home alone, there was no communication between us other than what was absolutely necessary. She tried very hard to get me to open up to her and talk to her and treat her as a mother, but I refused. I never mentioned why, but she knew. She knew. I didn't know then whether it was my attitude that finally pushed her over the edge, but I came home one day to find Dad sitting in the living room alone. I walked in, sat down beside him, and asked him what was wrong. He had been crying, that I knew by his face. That bothered me because my dad never cried. He was strong. He didn't say anything for some time, but finally he seemed to notice me sitting there. He pulled himself together then and told me, "Your mother has left me. She packed a few bags and most of her things and left. She didn't say anything before, so I had no idea there was any problem. She left a letter, and in it she said to tell you she loved you, and she was so sorry. Do you know what she meant? I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of leaving me to do her dirty work. I thought very hard and finally said, I have no idea either, Dad. She never said anything to me about leaving or being sad or anything. I don't know why she would do this to you. No idea at all? Are you very sure? Nothing you want to tell me? Nothing, Dad, honest. I didn't know she was going to leave us." My father looked back at me, an expression on his face that I never would understand. He seemed sad, but there was also a deep-seated anger that burned just below the surface. I assumed it was from Mom's actions, and I felt I understood. How wrong I was. We never talked about Mom after that. Dad put her out of his mind, at least around me, but I watched him and saw the toll it took on him. He began to run down, as if he had nothing left to live for. Her cheating was one thing, but to leave him the way she did showed me she was a coward and a cold-hearted, nothing I didn't already know about her. I thought to myself that it was better for him that she was gone. I believed that. I just wish Dad could see it for himself. It was almost 8 years later, when I was in college and Dad got very sick, that I found out what Mom said in her letter to Dad. I was cleaning his room one day while he was in the hospital, and I found the letter. It was worn, folded, and unfolded so many times that it was almost in pieces. There were bleached spots on it that indicated water stains, Probably tears, I guessed. I took it and carefully unfolded it and laid it on the table to read. My darling husband, Mark, I can't go on this way anymore. I have to tell you something, and it breaks my heart to do it. I was unfaithful to you with James Carter. It was only once, but that was one too many times, and I must pay for my sin. The only time was here in our home, in our bed, and to make my shame so hard to bear, our son saw me. He came home and saw his mother betraying his father. It was the same night he came home so very late, and you were so angry with him, and I was so ashamed that I allowed you to be angry with him and to punish him. I know he was torn by what I did, and that's why he was away. He ran away, my dear Mark, because I compounded my sin by asking our son to lie for me, to say nothing to you, and he promised because I told him that to tell you would cause you pain. I never considered the pain he was in by having to lie to his father. For that also I must pay. Our son hates me to this day, and his hate has made my life a living hell. Every day he looks at me with eyes filled with accusation and contempt. He never speaks to me as his mother, and when you are not there, he speaks to me not at all. His hate is justified, but it is also more than I can bear. For that you must forgive him as I have, since my actions made him do this. But his hate pales in comparison to the hate I have for myself. I betrayed both of you, Mark, and that is more than I can stand. Please know that nothing you did caused me to be unfaithful to you. It was my own weakness and base desires. You were always my love, and I needed nothing more. My sin was curiosity. I simply wanted to know what else was out there in the world. James had tried over many years to tempt me, and he constantly gave me compliments. When he came to our house that day and made his suggestions and plied me with his flattery, I was weak and finally gave in to his urgings. Know that I found nothing that day that equaled what I already had, and that is so sad. I destroyed our home for nothing. I set you free. I set David free as well. Please give him my love, and please don't look for me. With all my love, your wife always, Lisa. I read it again and carefully refolded it and placed it back where I found it. I had mixed emotions about what she said. I wasn't sure how I felt. It was clear that she paid a terrible price for her cheating, but her weakness allowed it to become so much worse that it finally destroyed all of us. Why she never admitted what she did to my father continued to bother me. It would have made the whole difference if Dad had forgiven her. I would have as well. If she were stronger and told the truth, we would still be a family. Now Dad and I lived alone, and we had no idea where she was. Our family was fractured by her actions, and finally broken by her selfish weakness. There was only one thing that bothered me. I was confused by her asking Dad to forgive me. What did I do? It was her. Dad died that summer, and I buried him in the cemetery where he had plots for the three of us. Mom's hadn't been used, of course, and I doubted I would ever use the third. The ceremony was short and attended by a very few of his friends. Dad had withdrawn after Mom left, and the many friends he once enjoyed had slowly dwindled. As the last mourner left, I stood there over the hole that would soon hide his earthly remains. I said a silent goodbye and moved back. As I glanced up at the horizon, I saw a lone woman standing there, the sun to her back blocking any view of her face. I watched her for a few seconds before the knowledge exploded in my head. That was my mother. She had come to his funeral. I was uncertain of what to do. Should I go to her, ask her if she would like to pay her respects? I started forward, then stopped. What could I say to her? How would she respond? I began walking towards her again, only to see her turn and walk rapidly toward a waiting taxi. Before I could say anything, she had entered the back and the cab pulled away. The tinted windows blocked any view of her as the cab passed by me, heading out of the cemetery. I never expected to see her again, and I was not sure how I felt about that. But after Dad died, I put it all behind me, sold the dealership, sold the old house, and moved all my stuff into a small duplex that I bought. I was still in college on a full ride, and I had a year to go before graduation. I went back to campus and finished out my senior year. I graduated with a degree in business, and I felt somewhat alone as I milled around with my fellow graduates. I was introduced to several of my friends' families and tried to be charming and engaging, but the loneliness was painful. Dad was gone, and I had no siblings. It was just me. I stayed as long as was polite, then started back to my room to finish packing. I was paying no attention when I heard a voice say, "Congratulations." I turned and searched the milling people before noticing her. She was standing aside, out of the crowd, dressed in a dark suit with sunglasses. I almost didn't recognize her, but then she stepped forward to face me. It was her, Lisa, my mother. "Congratulations, David. You must be very proud." She held out her hand. Without thinking, I took it and held it for several seconds as my mind processed the fact that she was here. She had changed a lot. She was still as I remembered her, but her face was more mature, more lines around the mouth and eyes, but still a beautiful woman. I noticed that I still held her hand and released it. She seemed almost sad at that. "Thank you. I didn't know you were here. I had no idea how to contact you to send you an invitation." That last was said with a trace of sarcasm. It was out before I knew it. "I've tried to be aware of the important times in your life since I left, David. I was there at the funeral, and I know you saw me. I've always known what you were doing. Why didn't you call or write to tell us you were okay? Dad worried about you until the day he died. He never forgot you, and I know he forgave you. So why didn't you come back? Because of you, David. He forgave me, but you never did. Never once did you think to give me a chance or ask your father to ask me to come home. He knew how to reach me, David. He always knew. But because of you, he let me go. That was news to me and something I never heard from Dad. Could it be true? I didn't want to believe that, so I pushed it out of my mind and changed the subject. What about you? What are you doing now, and where are you living? Just polite talk, no real interest, right? I've remarried. My husband, Bill, is a very sweet man, and we have 2 children now. They are your half-brother and sister, David. Maybe someday you can meet them. Would you like my number? You could call any time, and I would be delighted to see you. I was stunned to hear I had 2 half-siblings. The information was too much for me to take in on this day of days. I stumbled through an excuse that I had to rush to pack and catch a ride home. I turned and ran toward my apartment without waiting for her number. I knew it was cowardly, but I had no control then. Now I realize that I should have done more to heal the wounds that still hurt me, but I didn't. After graduation, I went back home to work for Charles Simmons. He had an investment counseling business, and he handled several of the larger local businesses' financial affairs. Many people would be surprised to find how much money is invested by large companies for tax purposes and for long-term growth. In addition, he had hundreds of individual accounts that his staff managed, and that's where he started me. I managed 10 of the middle-sized accounts with oversight from Charles and other senior accountants. I learned, and my accounts increased. With each account, my base salary increased until soon I was making good money. I worked during the days and began to look for excitement at several of the clubs in downtown Denver. I was a pretty good dancer, and I drank moderately, never getting drunk and losing control. I rarely drank past midnight, and by the time I headed home, I was sober enough to avoid trouble with the cops. I restricted my late nights to Friday and Saturday and rarely did much during the week. I still went out, but it was usually locally. I met Jennifer Sanders at one of the clubs I frequented. I had seen her several times before, usually in the company of a man, and she seemed to love to dance. She was one of those girls who looked perfect on the dance floor, long legs, perfect calves, short skirts that showed them off to their best advantage. Her waist was small, and she usually displayed a lot of cleavage. She was blonde, of course, and wore her hair long and straight. Her face was pretty well, more than pretty, almost beautiful. What I could see of her eyes told me they were green. She seemed so sure of herself, always in control and always laughing. I watched her with pleasure. It was one Saturday night when she came in alone. She looked around, saw me sitting at the bar, and walked over. I watched her approach with curiosity. I had never spoken to her, nor she to me, so what was she doing now? I looked at her as she approached, my eyes holding hers. She came directly over to me, slid onto a stool beside me, and spoke. "Buy me a drink." She met my look with a smile and what seemed to be a knowing look. "Of course, my name is David. What would you like?" "Just a beer, please, and my name is Jennifer. I've seen you here lots of times. I thought it was time we met." Well, that was the beginning. We stayed and danced that night until it was time to leave. I asked her if I could give her a ride, and she accepted. We went to her place, talked until the small hours, and I left happy. We simply talked, and I wanted nothing more than to do just that. She was fascinating, and I loved to watch her mouth as she spoke of herself. I learned that she was the same age as I, and she worked in a gallery in town that sold paintings, art of all kinds, and took work from artists on commission. She had a degree in fine arts, and got into this work by accident. She loved it. I told her about myself, my work, my life in general, and she listened so intently I felt she really wanted to know. She certainly knew how to win my attention. We talked about all kinds of things and were completely unaware of the passage of time. It was almost 4 in the morning before I looked at my watch. When I discovered how long I had been there, I apologized profusely, but she just smiled and said she had the best time. She walked me to the door. I kissed her once, very soft, and asked her if I could see her again. We made plans to go out to dinner next week. As I drove home, I couldn't get Jennifer out of my head. I told myself it was silly since I barely knew her, but my heart didn't agree. It was already lost. The next few days were torture, and I wondered why I hadn't thought to get her phone number. I finally looked her up in the book and found it. I called Tuesday and talked to her again. It was almost a continuation of Saturday night. I never wanted to hang up, neither did she. I couldn't wait till tomorrow night and dinner. Jennifer and I began to date, and soon it became exclusive. After being with her for less than 6 months, I proposed, and she accepted. We decided to get married as soon as possible. Since she had no family to speak of, and neither did I, we flew to Las Vegas and got married in a small ceremony, neither of us knowing who stood for us or who performed the ceremony. We spent a week there as our honeymoon. We rarely got out of the room for the first 4 days. Our intimacy was one of the things that made us want to get married. She was insatiable in the bedroom, and she was up for almost anything. As we began our married life, we talked long and hard about what we each expected from the other. Neither of us wanted children, at least not for the foreseeable future, maybe sometime later. I spent one rainy afternoon telling Jennifer about my mother and what she did. I let her know that infidelity was a non-starter for me. If she wanted to consider an affair, I told her to let me know, and I would free her of her marriage commitments immediately. She would then be free, and I would let her go. I told her that the pain of losing her would be infinitely less than the pain of her betraying me. She listened, told me she understood perfectly, and she assured me she felt the same way. We promised each other again that we would remain faithful unless, God forbid, we decided to end our marriage. Then we would do so first before a betrayal could occur. Our marriage was strong, and Jennifer and I did many things together. We traveled the world, went skydiving, deep-sea diving and fishing, and learned to ski and snowboard. We went camping and spent many nights out under the stars in our sleeping bags in a tent. Our life was filled with each other and many adventures. We matured together and learned each other's desires and secrets. We shared everything. We had friends by the dozen, and we did things with them when our common interests matched. We had no special friends, however, always keeping those we liked close but not intimate. It seemed safer to both of us that way. We had been married 6 years when the first problems occurred. Jennifer had been running the gallery for the past 2 years, and the owner wanted to sell. Jennifer talked to me about buying the gallery herself, and I listened to her proposal. We had the money, and she seemed so sure that I, of course, agreed. She made the offer, and the owner accepted. 3 months later, we owned the gallery. Jennifer began working there more and more hours, and I began to see a change in her. She was more intense now, and she seemed to be more and more involved with buying and selling. I was pleased that she was so happy running the place, but I was not as happy with the amount of time she was spending there. It continued for the next year before I finally had to say something. We talked one Sunday when Jennifer was home. I told her of my concerns, and she listened, but told me that she felt I was overreacting. She agreed that she had been spending a lot of time there, but she promised to slow down, and begin to delegate some of the work to Paula, the woman who worked with her. She also promised to hire another sales girl to free up more time. I was happy with these plans and told her so. We spent the rest of the day together, something we hadn't done for a while. Jennifer was her old self, and I welcomed her home. I felt things would return to normal soon. My job was less stressful. I was now a full partner in the business, and I had 15 people working under my direction. Unlike Jennifer, I spent less and less time at the office since my job was mentoring and monitoring, which I did while I was there. With good training, my people were able to work without my constant direction, leaving me free to make cold calls and deal with specific problems, all things done during working hours. Money was no object to Jennifer and me, and we had made all the arrangements for our retirement and funding for the things we planned to do. We had now been married for 8 years. Jennifer had cut back on the gallery hours, and I was spending more time at home. We settled into a routine that included going out to dinner several nights a week, spending weekends at our cabin up in the mountains where we had four-wheelers and snowmobiles, depending on the season, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. The only thing I began to notice was that our intimacy began to change. At first, it was very subtle. Jennifer would sometimes claim to be too tired to do anything. Sometimes it would be a headache that seemed to occur more often now than before. At other times, when she was willing, her involvement was less than enthusiastic. Before, she had been very vocal and very active now, much less so, except on weekends when she seemed to be more like her old self. At first, I chalked it up to fatigue from working too much. I decided to mention it one night when she claimed fatigue. "Jennifer, honey, what's going on? You've changed over the past few months. You're tired a lot. You have headaches way too often. And you seem to be so distracted during the week. And you've been spending more and more time at the gallery again. You're imagining things again, David. I'm tired, yes, but only because we have been trying to get more artists to show their works, and the headaches are from stress and tension. I'm okay, really. Please don't worry so much. I have to worry when you seem so distracted and distant. It makes me wonder, Jennifer. It makes me afraid that you seem to be drifting away. I don't know what to do except worry. Please don't, David. I'm okay, I promise you. And I'm not drifting away. I love you, David, and only you. There's never been anyone else for me." To make her point, she changed her mind and we spent some time together. It was more like old times, and I began to relax and accept her assurance. That was a mistake. I told myself later that her actions were more from guilt than from any attempt to try to get back to where we were. I began to think back to the actions of my mother. She tried to make up for her indiscretion by treating my father like a king, doing what she could for him and always being there for him, much like Jennifer was beginning to do. Since our lives had become so predictable, Jennifer and I both did the same things we had been doing, with one exception. I began to work less and less and spend more time watching my Jennifer. I would drive downtown to the gallery and sit across the street at a small cafe. I would watch the front door for a while, knowing that the back door led to a dead-end alley, and only the garbage trucks used it. It was not safe for cars or people to be back there, since it was home to drug users and alcoholics. All deliveries came in the front door, as did visitors or employees. I watched from my seat, especially after closing time. Jennifer never left until an hour or so later. Several times I watched Jennifer go out accompanied by a young man I had never seen. He was usually carrying a large display satchel, one designed to carry sketches or small paintings. He must be an artist. They would walk together, him carrying the satchel, Jennifer with her hand on his free arm. I would watch them until they were a short distance down the street. Then I exited the cafe and followed them. They usually stopped, talked intently for a few minutes. Then she got in her car and drove off. He watched her go, then walked away, heading for what I knew to be his flat. I had followed him twice to the same place. After a few weeks of this behavior, I determined to meet this young man. I left work one afternoon and drove down to the gallery. I went in just about closing time and greeted those employees I knew. They said their goodbyes as they left, leaving me standing there alone in the store, except that Jennifer should be there, as should the young man. I walked toward the back, where I knew there was a large open space sometimes used as a display area for works to be marked for sale. As I entered that area, I saw Jennifer and the young man standing closely together, looking at something. I walked over slowly, making as little noise as possible until I was very close to them. "This one is exquisite. I love it. Are you sure you want to sell it?" Jennifer was standing with one hand on his arm, both looking at whatever was on the easel in front of them. "I do not want to sell it. I had hoped you would accept it as a gift to show my affection for you." He put his hand over hers where she had it on his arm. It was a very tender action for someone who was supposed to be a client. "I couldn't accept this, Robert. It's too precious. You could get a fine price for it." Robert, if that was his name, moved his arm to place it around her shoulder. Jennifer moved toward him, and that was the moment I made a noise. Both of them jumped in surprise and turned around to find me standing immediately behind them. I watched his face as it showed surprise and irritation, while Jennifer's surprise turned immediately to shame and embarrassment. Her face flushed red and then slowly paled. "David, I didn't hear you come in. What are you doing here?" I looked at her for a moment as I collected my thoughts. I was angry but not ready to let this young man know that. My delay was making her nervous, and I decided to speak before she did. "I didn't know I needed a reason to visit my wife. Perhaps I should call ahead. Would that be more appropriate?" "Of course not. This is your place as much as it is mine. David, I'd like to introduce you to Robert Greene. He's showing his work with us this month, and it's doing very well. We were just discussing his latest work." She pointed to a soft pastel painting of a woman, silks flowing around her body as she stood on a balcony. It appeared she was nude beneath the silks, and there were tantalizing glimpses of her pale skin where the silks fluttered out. I looked carefully at the face, and what I saw was an amazing likeness to my wife, painted by someone who obviously felt more than a passing fancy for her. I felt my own blood rise up my neck into my face as I slowly turned to face Robert. "Set your price for this one. I'll buy it from you. I do not want it on display. Do you understand?" I looked directly into his eyes, showing him my displeasure. I only hoped he was smart enough to see it and understand it. He returned my look, his lips beginning to curl in arrogant amusement. He nodded as he acknowledged my intent. "I will allow you to make the offer. I will accept whatever you feel it is worth." That answer was a challenge to me, and he expected me to fumble with my reply. "I think not. The work is priceless, we both know that, but I will pay you $300 for your time and effort. That is far less than you would get if you put it out for display, and far less than it is worth." I heard a gasp from Jennifer, but interestingly enough, no reaction from Robert. I continued, now raising my voice in anger. "But it is more than you deserve for the disrespect you show me." With that, I lifted the painting from the easel. I walked over to the work table on the side of the room, picked up a knife designed to slit canvas with no tearing, and sliced the painting out of the frame. I threw the frame away, then rolled it up, turned to Jennifer, who was watching me with a look of horror on her face, and said, "I'll see you at home. Good night, Mr. Greene." With that, I walked out of the room and out the door to find my car. The ride home was a blur of confusion. What had I witnessed tonight? I knew what I saw in his painting, his infatuation with Jennifer, if that's what it was. But what did I see in her reaction to my appearance? That was more confusing. She reacted in guilt and embarrassment, which indicated her thoughts were not those she would want me to know. That was a concern. I pulled into my driveway with no clear indication of what was happening inside. I unrolled the painting and looked again at its subject. It took no imagination to see Jennifer's face in the girl. The tilt of her head and the way her eyes looked back at whoever was behind her showed a coy awareness of her beauty, and the way she was dressed, and the way the wind moved her garments, cried seduction. But in Robert's mind, who was being seduced? It was clear to me. I took the painting into the living room and, using some tape, secured it to the painting over the mantel. I stood back to admire my work. Once again, it was clear to me that Robert Greene was in love with my wife and saw her returning his love. I was sitting in the same place when I heard the door open and Jennifer's voice calling for me. I didn't bother to answer, my mind still trying to cope with the new directions opened with my revelations tonight. I could hear her moving through the house, still calling my name, until she walked into the room where I was sitting. She stopped, a small gasp indicating she had seen the painting. She walked slowly in to stand next to me where I sat in a straight-backed chair facing the mantel and the painting. "It's not what you think, David. It isn't. It is just a work of art, and one that I wanted him to hang in the gallery. That's all it was. I don't know what you thought when you said those terrible things to Robert." I looked up at her to see if she really believed the words she was saying. She met my eyes only briefly before looking away, so she was not telling me the truth, and she knew I was aware of it. What else was she not telling me? Look at the painting. Look at the face. If you don't see it, you have no business owning an art gallery. The man is obsessed with you. He is in love with you, and you were aware of it, and you were not discouraging him. Tell me I'm wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. He is an excellent artist, and that's all. So it looks like me. So what? That doesn't mean anything. You're taking this out of all context. She spun around and almost ran from the room. I remained where I was, my heart beginning to accept the hurt I knew was coming. Hadn't I lived through this once before? Hadn't I seen the betrayal? Hadn't my mother asked me to lie for her, just as Jennifer was asking me to accept her lies? Where was the difference? As I walked into the kitchen to find a drink and something to eat, I felt the depression begin to take over again. I had experienced this before, so it was all much like DGC vu. I was sitting at the table holding an open bottle of beer and a cold sandwich of some mystery meat I had found in a tray in the refrigerator when Jennifer came in. She had changed into jeans and a sweatshirt, and her face showed determination. She apparently was determined to try to force the lie down my throat. Well, my mother tried that before, and she was only partly successful. I would accept the lie, but I would not accept the liar. We would live as I had lived before with my mother, she comfortable in her lies and me comfortable in my shell. So be it. So began 3 weeks of hell. I was firm in my commitment to accept her lies, but I was also firm in my commitment to not accept her. If she chose to live a lie, then I would live with her lies, but my way. She knew how I felt. We had this discussion before we were married, and she had agreed that living with a lie was not acceptable in a marriage based on trust. She agreed. Now she had betrayed me with her support of young Robert Greene and his obsession with her as borne out in his painting. I knew the inevitable outcome of this, and I simply waited for proof of her breaking her vows. Just like my mother, she fell. Just as Jennifer was heading for a fall. I was sitting at the table one morning drinking a cup of coffee before heading into the office to pretend to be working. I had been doing this now for the past 3 weeks, staying as late as possible before coming home. I knew Jennifer was doing the same and spending long hours with her young artist. I wondered where they were meeting to consummate their lust. Maybe it was time to follow her again to end this charade. I decided tonight to do just that. I felt a little better at the thought of finally doing something. I was smiling to myself when Jennifer came down. She saw the smile and mistook it for something other than what it was. "Well, it seems you are in a better mood finally. It's been a while since you've done anything except grunt at me. Do you feel like talking to me this morning?" She sat down across from me with a cup of her own. "What is it you want me to say?" "It seems to me you made it very clear that I was mistaken, and that you want me to believe your story rather than the truth." I sipped my coffee, looking up at her. As usual, she wouldn't hold my gaze. She lowered her eyes to the table before answering. "Why is it that you are so convinced that something is going on? Can't you trust me? Don't you believe that Robert is simply a talented artist and that he used me as a model for his last painting? Honestly, David, I don't see what you do." She did raise her eyes this time, and I held them with my own. "No, I don't believe that, and neither do you. I just wish you would tell me flat out that you want out of this marriage and that you want the freedom to do what you want. Why is that so hard?" I was becoming angry at her insistence that I was in the wrong. Damn it, David, I don't want out of this marriage. Why do you insist on trying to make something out of nothing? Why? I've done nothing wrong. Nothing. And what did I see the night I took the painting? What would have happened if I had not been there? He put his arm around you, and you were moving closer to him. I saw you, and I know you. I saw you, and I knew that you were going to let him kiss you. Deny that. I dare you to deny it. All right. Maybe I would have, but it would have meant nothing, and I would have immediately stopped it. You have to believe me, David. I know how to control myself, and I feel nothing for Robert Greene except respect for his talent. That can be intense, but it is nothing else. I don't believe Robert feels that way about me, and I certainly don't have those feelings for him. That is the truth. That's where we disagree. He does have feelings for you, and I believe you return those feelings. I know what I saw, and I know the hours you were spending at the gallery every night are not spent alone. Tell me I'm wrong about that. You're not wrong, but it's not what you think. We are working on a major showing of his work in New York. It's going to happen next month, and our gallery is going to be the sponsor. It will mean a great deal to us and mean more publicity and the increased business that will bring. That's what I've been doing. Congratulations. Will you be going to New York with our Robert? Spend a few nights with him, just the two of you? Jennifer looked at me in fury, threw her coffee cup against the wall behind me, and then ran out of the kitchen, sobbing loudly. I watched her go with mild interest. I had my plans, and I would get the proof I needed this evening. Then I could end this fiasco. I left for work, knowing Jennifer would be getting dressed for her own plans. I knew what I was going to do now, and I felt better than I had in some time. I spent a few hours with my top staff going over some new clients and some new business and left it to them to carry it out. They had been working independently for some time anyway, and I thought about finally making it permanent. I could retire, and the money for my commissions would continue to flow in. I could go back to doing those things we used to enjoy together, surfing, camping, cycling, lots of things a man still young could do. Hell yes, I had just turned 35. Plenty of time to do other things, meet new people, maybe some new women. Why not? My life was still ahead of me. Right at 6:00, I left the building and drove over to the gallery. It closed at 6:30 during the week, so I sat down in the little cafe across the street and watched. I noted that several people came out and walked away. I paid little attention to them until I noticed one woman walking away, her back now to me. I thought I recognized her but couldn't place her. As she got further and further away, my brain continued to process what I saw, and it finally dawned on me. It was Lisa, my mother. I started to rise and follow her when I saw Robert Greene exit the shop, Jennifer stopping in the doorway and talking to him. I sat back down and watched the exchange. It was obviously something they were disagreeing on, since there were several gestures indicating emotion. I couldn't tell what it was about until Robert drew his hand down in a dramatic sweep and stood there holding that pose in my wife's eyes. She finally dropped her head and looked down at her hands. Robert strode rapidly away, and Jennifer watched him go. She shook her head as if in frustration, then walked back inside. I ordered a coffee to go and waited for Jennifer to close up. I was going to follow her to her car and then to wherever she went. It was only 5 more minutes when Jennifer exited the gallery carrying a rolled tube. She locked the door behind her and then started down the street. I was taken by surprise when she walked past the lot where she was parked. She was going further down the street. She was going to his apartment. While I had expected something, some sign of her planned betrayal, this was more than I had expected. I thought she would be more discreet. Apparently, her disregard for me was so complete that she had no need for subtlety. At least now I could follow her, keeping out of sight since I knew her destination. I followed her the 3 blocks to where he lived and watched her walk up the steps to his building's entrance. Enough of remembering. I jerked my attention back to the sight before me. She had disappeared up the stairs to his 2nd-floor apartment. I had my proof. She was having an affair with him, just as I assumed, and she had made a choice without keeping to her word to tell me in advance so I could set her free. Just like my mother, just as I expected. I knew when I asked her for her promise to tell me before betraying me that she would do just as my mother had before her. I knew it. Mother betrayed Dad and asked me to lie for her. Jennifer betrayed me and asked me to accept her lie. Where was the difference? I walked back to my car and drove home. I took my time, knowing Jennifer would be very late tonight. I had time to make some decisions, to make plans. I walked into my house feeling the silence, the emptiness. That feeling was new, but I knew it was going to be the feeling that prevailed from now on. I had no appetite, so I just grabbed a beer from the fridge and went into the family room. I sat down in my chair, stabbed the remote at the TV, and sat back to let the mindless drivel soak into my weary brain, bringing oblivion with it. She would be gone now at least 2 or 3 hours, so I couldn't expect her back until close to midnight. It was strange that she didn't even leave me a message telling me she would be late. Was she so callous that she felt it would make no difference to me? Of course she was, just like my mother. Hide your sin at all costs to protect yourself. Jennifer probably felt if I had no evidence, she could continue to expect me to buy into the lie. I remembered the anger I felt when my mother asked me to lie to my father. It was a slow-burning anger that slowly consumed my heart and soul. I treated her like she was, giving her no kindness or respect. When Dad was around, I acted as if nothing was wrong. But when we were alone, I would ignore her and refuse to speak to her unless asked a direct question. She was angry at first. Then she slowly began to stop talking to me and finally to accept that I was not there for her. Neither of us let Dad know anything was wrong, but I knew, and she knew. She never did tell him, and finally, she left. I guess she was such a coward that she couldn't stand it. Well, Dad was better off without her, wasn't he? As that question circled around and around in my brain, I began to feel a warmth creep up my neck and into my face until finally it burned in panic. Was I wrong? Had my father really been happier with her gone? Was I lying to myself to justify my own anger and feelings of betrayal? Oh God, what if I had been wrong? I told myself he was better off for years, but I never questioned it. God, I had refused to face the answer to that question all this time. The answer was right in front of me all that time. The answer was no. He was miserable, and it was my fault, not hers. I remember the look on his face when she left. He asked me if I knew what she meant when she said she was so sorry. I lied to him and said I didn't have any idea. I remembered that look on his face. Was it anger at me? I finally knew that was exactly what it was, but he forgave me as she requested. I drove her away and I lied to him about that as well. What was it she said? You must forgive him. I have. How could she? How could he? God, I was miserable. I was going to ruin my life like I ruined my father's and my mother's. I was doing exactly the same thing to my wife, Jennifer, driven by my obsession with my mother's infidelity. And in the end, she had paid a greater price for it than she deserved because I couldn't forgive her. 11 years old. And I had the wisdom of the ages when I refused to see weakness as a human condition rather than a sin not worthy of forgiveness. And who was I, a child, to make that decision for my father? He and my mother both paid a price for my stubbornness. I suddenly realized it was too high a price to pay. All of this ran through my mind in those first minutes. Had I already driven Jennifer away with my insane jealousy and my overbearing moral superiority? Only this morning I had accused her of infidelity but allowed her no chance to defend herself. It was just 7:30, a half hour after I saw my wife climbing the steps to meet her lover, when I heard the front door open and close. I stood up and turned to face whoever it was, my heart pounding in my chest in both fear and hope. I knew what I wanted, but did I dare hope? Could I make this right, or was it too late? I watched as Jennifer stepped into the room. Hi, I'm glad you're here. I have something to say to you. Please wait for me. I want to change first and then get something to drink. I won't be but a minute. She waited. Then, when I didn't answer, she walked up the stairs to change. I sat back down, My surprise increased by my pleasure and relief that she hadn't stayed at Robert's apartment for more than a few minutes. That meant more to me at that moment than I could ever have imagined. Maybe it wasn't too late, but then again, it may already have happened. I got a second beer and returned to the room to wait. My mind was trying to cope with all I had come to understand this day. There was too much information, too many mistakes, and too much blame. Nothing was as it should be. My simple life and the simple truths I had clung to were no more. They were false truths of an 11-year-old boy, not those of a man. Truths that had destroyed the lives of two people I cared about, two people who deserved more than the contempt their son had heaped upon them. The shame I considered due my mother was more mine than hers. She was an honest woman who made a mistake, and I was the self-righteous son who refused to forgive her. Jennifer walked into the room, a cup of coffee in one hand. She took the chair across from me where she normally sat when we were in this room. She looked tired. Her face was drawn, lines around her eyes and mouth were more pronounced, and there was a lack of color in her cheeks and lips. She was beautiful. How could she not be? It was who she was, as much a part of her as her skin. As I gazed at her, I felt a lump form in my throat, indicating my grief. I nodded at her to begin. First, I want to say you were right. Robert is in love with me, and I was the woman in his painting. The painting said it all, and you saw it. You saw what he felt and what he wanted me to see, and for that I feel ashamed. You saw it and told me, and I defended him. I was so wrong. Jennifer looked now at her hands folded on her lap, the coffee forgotten. This past week has been very busy getting the arrangements for the New York showing set. We have been working long hours together, and I failed to see what was happening. Robert was reading things into my actions that I didn't mean. He took my admiration of his talent too far and made assumptions that were false. But again, I didn't see it, but you did, and you tried to tell me, and I ignored you. I disrespected you in this, and for that I am sorry. It came to a head today. I finally heard you this morning when you accused me of planning a trip with him to New York. That you could possibly think that of me meant I had somehow given you doubts. Somehow you were able to come to believe that of me because we were drifting apart and I was the cause. I paid more attention to him than to my husband. And today, when I looked at the painting with that understanding, I saw me as he wanted me to be, and I was ashamed. I listened to her words, and I began to feel the weight of the world lifting from my shoulders. It wasn't too late. Regardless of what had already happened, she was still my wife and still my love. She understood what I saw, and it reminded her of the promises we made to each other. Perhaps she had strayed once, but she would stray no more. I could live with that, as I should have allowed my mother to live with her indiscretion. If I had, my father would have been happy. His life would have been worth living. Instead, I took that away from him, and I was ashamed. I looked at her face, her eyes, and leaned forward to show her I was serious. Then I can forgive you for what you have done. If you come home to me and tell me that you will not stray again, I will accept that and love you as I have. She was shaking her head, smiling now. But you don't understand. I've done nothing but forget that you were only trying to warn me. I should have seen the danger earlier and not caused you to worry about something that would never happen. You don't understand that I could never do anything to hurt you, regardless of who tempts me. I went to Robert's apartment tonight to return the painting to him and to tell him that I will no longer work directly with him. I feel nothing but admiration for him, but his feelings for me are not the same. I cannot allow him to think things could be different. They can't. You are my love and my only love. My heart overflowed with joy. She was true to me, and I was the one who was blind. We rose together and embraced. I love you, my wife. I love you with all my heart. We spent the evening talking and reconfirming our love. It had been too close this time. We lost our ability to talk to each other, and we lost that thread that held us together. That was a danger that we had to avoid. To that end, I made a suggestion to her. Jennifer, I would like to find my mother and try to make amends to her. I've learned too much about myself and what I did to her and my father. I need to tell her and ask her to forgive me. She said she did, but I have to hear it for myself. Would you mind? I didn't know whether she knew who she had been seeing in the gallery, but she surprised me when she said, "Of course, I don't mind. Would you like me to invite her over the next time I see her?" I smiled at her and told her I would be delighted. Thanks for watching. What would you do if you discovered a loved one's betrayal and faced the truth about your own past mistakes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.
It took a divorce and a 3-year-old child to pull the blindfold off my eyes and make me face what I really knew had been there for a while. I hadn't wanted to see it. I'd ignored it as long as I could, but suddenly I was right up against it. The funeral was for my maternal grandfather, who died of a massive heart attack, and the 3-year-old was my daughter, Mia. We were at my mother's house the day after the funeral, making ready to leave and return home. The luggage was all packed and loaded into the rear of the Ford Explorer, and I was putting Mia in her car seat. "Would you like your shoes off, honey?" I asked her. I knew the answer, but I liked asking because she would reply, and I loved the sound of her little girl's voice. "Yes, please," she said solemnly and very distinctly. I smiled at her and began to unbuckle the straps on her tiny sneakers. I didn't bother to ask if she would like her socks on or off. The answer was always off. It had to have been from my side of the family. I'd rather go barefoot myself than deal with uncomfortable shoes. With her socks off and her toes wriggling in undisguised relief, I tickled the soles of her feet. She knew I would and had been watching me intently, waiting for the moment she could squeal and kick her feet as if she actually wanted to get away from my tickling fingers. She didn't, though. She'd have been unhappy if I hadn't done it. This was a game we often played, and one we both had come to cherish. It struck me that we'd been playing it a lot lately. My young daughter and I were spending more and more time together. Both of us seemed to cherish the hours we had in each other's company. It was not so with my wife, Sarah, though. Before I could explore that thought, my angelic little daughter interrupted my musings. "Daddy?" Mia asked. I was leaning past her and placing her shoes on the bench seat beside her. I stuffed each sock carefully inside the proper shoe and pushed the shoes a little into the cushion so they'd stay there. "What, pumpkin?" I asked gently when she didn't immediately answer. I turned to look her in the eyes. "Why doesn't Mommy love us anymore?" she asked simply. I was taken aback. I stared at my child for a moment, unable to answer. "Honey, your Mommy loves us both, I'm sure," I said slowly. "And in particular, she loves you more than anything else in the whole wide world," I assured her. For a brief instant, there was a sparkle in her eyes, but then it faded. "But she didn't want to come with us to say goodbye to Grandpa," she said plaintively. I had no real answer except the one Sarah had given me. "She had to work, honey," I said. I was going to explain about the biggest account at the accounting firm where my wife worked and how it needed so much of her time and attention, but that would have raised far too many questions in a 3-year-old's mind. I was quiet for a long moment. "Mommy will be there when you get home, baby," I said, consolingly. "She'll be there waiting for you." "Does she have to work at night too?" Mia asked. I started to answer, saying no. Her mother went out at night with her friends a lot to unwind, but again, that would have raised more questions than it answered in Mia's mind. "No, baby girl," I said. "I think Mommy's about done with having to work so hard, and then she'll have lots more time to spend with you and me," I told her. Suddenly, I had to end this conversation. It was too uncomfortable. I buckled the last strap on the car seat, kissed my little girl above her head, and patted her arm before closing the door. 20 minutes later, she was peacefully asleep in the rear seat while I drove the big SUV down the interstate. My daughter slept, but I could not. I kept replaying her sad words in my mind. If a 3-year-old was noticing, it wasn't just me anymore. That was what Sarah had implied the last time I'd asked why she was going out with her friends so often. The sun had nearly set when we pulled into the driveway. My wife, Sarah, was indeed home. Mia ran upstairs, excited and bursting with things. She wanted to tell her mother about all the cousins she'd encountered at my mom and dad's. I tailed along behind, still consumed with the dark thoughts that had taken root in my mind on the drive home. Why was my wife spending so much of her time in the office or partying with her friends? I found Sarah sitting before her vanity, putting on makeup in her bra and panties. She rose to give me a peck on the cheek and a welcome. Without warning, the idea struck me that I couldn't remember the last time she'd given me a strong, lusty kiss and wrapped her arms around my neck to show me how much she loved me. I sat down on our bed and watched Mia talk to her for a while, without much of a reply from her mother. It was obvious, even to little Mia, that Sarah wasn't paying any attention, and after a while, Our daughter wound down and quietly went down the hall to her own room. Sarah continued primping, touching her hair, and getting her makeup just exactly right. "What's going on, Sarah?" I asked, trying to keep the unexpected emotion out of my voice. My stomach muscles were abruptly cramping, and I could feel the surge of blood up the back of my neck. It was difficult to breathe. "What do you mean, honey?" she replied. She had noticed my sudden agitation and was still giving all her attention to the mascara brush near her right eye. "We've only been home 10 minutes, I said brusquely, "and you're rushing off somewhere already." She stopped brushing her eyelashes and looked at me with poorly concealed impatience. "Honey, you know I always go out with the girls on Friday nights," she said in a tired, "we've gone over this before" voice. I didn't like her tone, and I didn't like the implication that she was doing something we'd agreed was right and proper. "Actually, my dear," I said sarcastically, "you go out with the girls on Saturday nights, some Sundays, almost every Wednesday, and virtually every Friday after work for happy hour. And sometimes they all blend into one long, excruciating night out for you." Mia had quietly disappeared after her mother had shut her out and was in her room with the door shut. I heard the strains of one of her educational toys starting to play a jingle. Getting up, I closed the bedroom door and turned back to find Sarah also standing and looking at me without any expression on her face. Moving fast, I stepped close to her and caught both her hands in mine. I hugged them to my chest. "Sarah," I said slowly, striving to keep control of my voice. "I didn't want it to break right now. Honey, Mia asked me this afternoon why you didn't love us anymore, and Sarah, I have to ask the same question, I guess." Sarah's eyes narrowed in that way that told me I'd trespassed into forbidden territory. I ignored the signs and plowed ahead. Do you still love me?" I asked my wife of 6 years. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she fought off a visible irritation and melted against me. "Of course, darling," she said softly. "I love you more today than when we got married, and I thought I'd die. Sometimes I was so happy." My stomach was still cramping, but I tried to relax. She was happy, but not now. "Then stay home tonight, honey," I said, ignoring my sudden misgivings. I refused to let a begging note come into my voice. Sarah sighed, patting me and stroking my chest. "We can put Mia to bed early," I said. "We'll dim the lights and bring up that bottle of wine we've been saving, and you can put on that black lace camisole I bought you for Valentine's Day. How about that?" Curiously, her body seemed to be reacting in favor of my idea until I mentioned the camisole. When I said that word, her body stiffened, and she tried to back away. I held her by the wrists and wouldn't let her retreat far. "Sarah," I said deliberately, "are you cheating on me?" I watched her closely as I spoke, and there it was. I saw a quick flicker deep in her eyes and a minuscule tightening at the corner of her eyes. They were gone. They vanished quicker than it takes to tell, but I'd seen them. I heard a sharp hiss as she drew in a quick breath of air. What wasn't gone was a suddenly racing pulse I could feel through my fingertips. ID kept her close to me by holding her wrists, and the pads of my first 2 fingers were resting on the primary blood vessels there. It was as reliable a lie detector as any FBI polygraph. I had my answer. "Don't be silly," my wife protested. "Honey, I could never love any man but you. You know that." She leaned into me, cuddling her head on my shoulder, breathing softly into my neck and giving me little kisses here and there. I noticed, though, her head didn't rest hard enough on my body to mess up her hair. Do I wonder if Sarah felt the cold chill that was rippling up and down my back? Sarah patted me on my upper arms and pulled away, turning to look at the clock beside the bed. "I'm going to be late," she said, "and I promised the girls I wouldn't be again. I've got to go. Maybe tomorrow night?" she asked gently. "Sarah, we really need some us time," I answered, not trying very hard to disguise my rising annoyance. "Tell the girls you'll make it some other time and spend tonight with me and our daughter. How about doing that for us, please?" I suggested. She pulled away and went to her closet to pull on a short skirt. "I can't disappoint all my friends," she protested. "Why would you want me to do that?" she said crossly. "Why would you want to disappoint me and your daughter?" I returned harshly. "Or don't we matter anymore to you?" Sarah's eyes narrowed as she worked herself into an anger to match mine. "I told you tomorrow," she snapped. "Damn it. I'm entitled to some time for myself without you always being there and smothering me to death. I'm not your goddamn slave, you know." We argued some more. She told me she was a free and independent member of this marriage, that I couldn't tell her what to do, and that she'd damn well do whatever she needed to do to get some relaxation and blow off some steam after a hard day's work. I said that she'd always been given plenty of space. I said the proof of that was that she'd never heard a word of protest from me when she went back to work after the baby. I said I thought it was great she was working as a mid-level manager at an accounting firm, when I actually made enough money for us to get along fabulously without her working at all. I told her I supported her career. I was proud as hell of all that she had accomplished, but I didn't see why her job and nights out with the girls overrode the family's needs. I got a little sarcastic when I mentioned the girls. I guess she got madder, asked what I was accusing her of, and then I left. I was too upset and too hot to keep going down that road. I'd have said something I might have later regretted. So I went downstairs to sit on the couch in the living room. I sat there, fuming, with half an urge to physically stop her from going out on me, this one night at least. But I knew, even through my rage, that I couldn't do that. When she came down the stairwell, I was reasonably calm. We looked at each other. She was defiant and I don't know what I was feeling. It wasn't good, though. "Sarah," I said, "please don't do this." My voice was unintentionally husky and deep. She stopped for a moment at the door, as if in indecision, then she opened it. "Sarah," I said, a little louder and more firmly. "Honey, I love you. I'm begging you, please don't do this to me and Mia." Sarah looked back at me, her face totally devoid of any expression. Then she stepped through the door and closed it decisively behind her. Mia came running down the stairs and into the foyer. She opened the outside door and watched as the headlights of Sarah's Acura disappeared down the street. Without saying a word, she shut the door and walked quickly over to the couch. I knew that walk. It was as if the polished marble of the foyer floor was too hot to walk on, and she had to get off it quickly. She clambered up on the couch near me and stared fixedly at the door for a while, as if hoping her mother would miraculously come back in. I stared too. After a moment, Mia climbed onto my lap and we hugged for a long time before I carried her into the kitchen to make a couple of sandwiches for us. It was a frosty, uncomfortable weekend between Sarah and me. She came home in the early hours of the morning and spent most of Saturday with a hangover so bad that the slightest noise caused her pain. After suffering Sarah's short temper for a time, Mia and I bailed out and went to the park. We didn't come home until after dinner time. That didn't suit Sarah very well at all. She lit into me when Mia and I got home, expressing her opinion at length of a husband and daughter who abandoned her. I took it for a while, but quickly got fed up. I told her she brought it on herself by going out on me and abandoning her daughter the night before. I said she would have to get used to the idea that Mia and I spent the afternoon alone and probably would again, and we'd had a fantastic time. Deal with it the best way she could, I said, whatever she did. I told her, without attempting to hide my irritation, deal with it civilly or shut the hell up. I'd never spoken to her that way, and it took Sarah by surprise. The shock, if nothing else, kept her quiet and attentive to Mia for the rest of the evening. Detecting a thaw in her attitude later that night, I initiated some tentative foreplay, but Sarah's stomach was still upset, and we had to break off when she ran for the bathroom. I tried again Sunday night, but Sarah lay there like a log, completely unresponsive. Instead of continuing, I rolled away from her and lay there seething. After a while, I got up and went to take another shower, hoping the rushing water would soothe me and let me get some sleep. It was only marginally successful. Monday morning, I left the house before Sarah got up. It was a thing I rarely did, mostly because it forced Sarah to get Mia up, dressed, fed, and off to daycare. My wife didn't like that unless she had everything all organized. It was a process guaranteeing she would be a half hour or more late to work. I wasn't in a mood to be terribly solicitous of Sarah's wants and needs that morning. Before I left, I went down into the basement, opened a cabinet that seemed to be nothing more than a place for miscellaneous tools, and flicked a switch that turned on a small piece of equipment that would record every landline phone conversation made from my house. A second switch activated a device that would intercept any cell phone calls made within a radius of 150 feet of the device's location. It wasn't strictly legal, but no one knew about it, and I'd never used the information captured by the equipment in any legal setting. Surveillance cameras already covered almost every room in the house. After I'd seen a documentary on A&E or Discovery or something explaining how a murder had been solved with images found on a homeowner's interior spy cams, I had them installed all over my house. A secondary purpose was to monitor the movements and activities of any babysitters Sarah and I brought into the house, as well as the housekeeper who came in 3 times a week. We trusted the housekeeper and also the teenage girls we hired to watch Mia for a few hours on the nights on those occasions when Sarah and I went out together. But trust but verify seemed a good policy to me. We hadn't, I reflected, had to hire a babysitter for too many months. I wasn't sure I was getting my money's worth from the expensive surveillance system. I pulled inside the tall chain-link fence surrounding the new campus and around to the business office on the far side of the complex. The fence and the razor wire at the top had gone up when we got our first Department of Defense contract 2 years ago. After that, the DoD came back twice for additional small, but decidedly more profitable deals. I pulled into the wide, clearly marked parking slot and shut the engine off. I sat there unmoving while I tried to make a decision. My gut kept telling me Sarah had some outside interest, but my brain countered, saying I had no actual proof. A racing pulse and a quick inhalation weren't enough to be sure. I'd seen a flash of guilt in her eyes, but she could be feeling bad about something else, only vaguely connected with what I'd asked her. I hope so, anyway. The logo on the wall in front of my car was unexpectedly obscured, and it brought me out of my stupor. I lifted my chin in greeting to Phil Sanders, one of the first people I'd hired. Opening the door, I tossed him a quick hello and busied myself getting my Palm Pilot and briefcase from the rear seat. Instead of going inside immediately, I looked at the brilliantly colored logo MA Industries. That's me, Mark Davis, at 38. I was CEO and president of a privately held little corporation that had started out as a small tool manufacturing company 12 years ago. We had found a niche making tilt and pan motor mounts for home security cameras. Working hard to sell ourselves, we found a number of private investigation companies who had a need for quality surveillance equipment. Over the years, we gradually built up a solid base of customers who came to trust us to provide high-quality, remotely controlled mounts. 8 years ago, we bought out a small company that made some excellent color cameras with an impressive optical zoom feature. The whole thing, including a powerful transmitter and separate receiver that could connect to an ordinary TV, was smaller than a woman's lipstick case. Now, my little corporation had the whole package, and we began marketing our products all over the state and had plans to begin selling them on the internet. After that, we absorbed a couple of private investigation agencies and combined them into a division we named Information and Surveillance Associates. In a year, we had branch offices in 3 other cities. Overall, MA Industries was doing quite well, though we maintained a comfortably low profile. In my office, I signed the papers my secretary, Maggie Davis, put in front of me without bothering to review them. This was the routine activity stack, and they didn't really need my attention, but they did need my signature. I'd gotten into the habit of teasing her by calling her Radar every so often, and did so now. She always responded tartly with an admonition for Colonel Potter to pay attention to what he was doing. Maggie was the glue that kept our business office together. When she was on vacation, the place didn't run nearly as smoothly, and I dreaded the day she would come to tell me she was retiring. To stave off that day as long as possible, I paid her as well as each of the 3 company vice presidents. She knew that. Maggie, I said, when she brought me in the first mug of coffee for the day. Maggie, would you please have Carl Winters come see me? She replied promptly, but looked at me curiously. Can I say why? She asked. I shook my head but reconsidered almost immediately. I felt the need to say something in partial explanation. Maggie was like a second mother to me, and had been since we started out in a renovated warehouse back in the old days. Just tell him I need to become a customer of his, I said slowly, not looking at Maggie. She didn't say anything for a moment. Oh, darn it all, she said softly. I'm so sorry, Mark. She sniffed softly, bit her lips, and left quickly. I stared after her, wondering what she knew, or perhaps had divined. Carl headed up our combined surveillance and private investigations division, and Maggie had read something into my request to see him as a customer. The fact that she had accepted my need without question was unsettling. What's up, Mark? Carl asked, coming into my office door. I motioned him to close the heavy oak door. I sat, looking at nothing in particular, while he took his first sip of tea from the big mug Maggie had brewed for him when he arrived. Carl, I started to explain, but I had to stop to clear my throat. It was hard to swallow. The tightness there was matched by stomach muscles, so tense they hurt. I'm afraid Sarah is getting into something that she'll regret, I said slowly. I was trying to carefully choose my words, not wanting to tell him I suspected she was seeing a man behind my back. Ah, Mark, he responded dejectedly. Damn, I'm sorry to hear that. We both took a deep breath. Carl set the mug on the corner of my desk and stared at his fingernails without speaking. I didn't know what to say either. Well, he said after an uncomfortable silence, we've got everything we need to find out for sure. I can get a few temps to come in and replace some of our guys to free them up for a concentrated effort. Can you give me an idea of Sarah's work schedule, her cell phone number, computer logins, credit card numbers, stuff like that? I nodded. I started to object to having in-house personnel work the case instead of bringing in outsiders for that purpose, but quickly realized Carl wanted to have the best people possible working the issue. Sighing, I pushed to the side of my desk and pulled my briefcase closer. I had spent most of Sunday copying account numbers and some of the other information I knew he'd need from documents Sarah and I had in our files. I had Carl set me up in the accounting division as a paying customer of Information and Surveillance Associates. I'd pay that branch of my firm for my personal checking account. It was a little thing, but it would keep any auditors happy. We discussed ways and means of putting tails on Sarah to see where she went, who she went with, and what they did when they got there. I felt guilt, and that was foolish. The hurt from this last weekend, combined with what I'd realized Friday night had been a steadily intensifying alienation from Sarah's affection, made this a necessity. There were things I needed to know. Frankly, if Sarah was doing nothing to harm the marriage, she'd never know what I was doing. Maybe I'd find a way to suggest we go to a marriage counselor to resolve whatever issues she was laboring under. If she was doing something a married woman shouldn't do, well, that was something I desperately needed to know. By noon, Carl's guys and gals had gotten into Sarah's Lexus at the office building downtown where she worked. It wasn't difficult. My name was on the title too, so I gave them my key. They installed the sound-powered microphone under the driver's seat. The signal from the tiny transmitter could be heard anywhere within a 1-mile radius. The mic itself was sensitive enough to pick up a soft whisper inside the well-soundproof car. A GPS transmitter was put in a hidden corner of the trunk and began to immediately broadcast the vehicle's location, accurate to within a few feet. Carl had 7 of his best people working the case and had dedicated 5 vehicles to the project. All of the cars and vans were rentals, having gone over by our own in-house mechanics to ensure they wouldn't die when needed most. One additional girl, a freelancer with excellent credentials, applied for a job in Sarah's accounting firm and expected to start the next week. Carl told me to sit back and let him take care of everything. There were operating procedures already in place to handle things like this, and it was best I stay out of it for the present. That depressed me even more. If Sarah was cheating on our marriage, it was such a tidy, mundane thing that there already were standard procedures to deal with it. He also told me I had a choice. If they found out about an impending tryst, they could try to break it up if my purpose was to do so, or we could hold off and get quantities of pictures and video for a divorce trial. I opted for interrupting any assignation they found out about. I didn't have to think about it. I wanted my wife back. He nodded and asked me to try not to upset Sarah in her routine. When we got to a decision point, he'd let me know. Instead, I let him know a cusp had already come and gone. That night, I called him from the basement after listening to the recordings from the cell phone intercept. The information so gathered wasn't legal, but we weren't expecting to use it in court. Carl answered on the second ring. "Carl," I asked, my voice thick with emotion. He picked up on it immediately. "Oh, geez," he said. "What's happened?" The concern he felt was evident. I took a deep breath and held it for a moment to get control of myself. "You know the cell phone and landline intercepts I had you install when we built the house?" I asked. "Yeah," he replied. Sorry we couldn't get over there today and set up the remote monitoring equipment, but, oh, I know, Carl," I cut him off. "There's only 26 hours in a day, right? Don't think anything about it. Anyway, Carl, I have a recorded conversation between Sarah and some guy called Brian, about 7 p.m. I drew a ragged lungful of air and continued. "You'll be able to hear it yourself tomorrow, I guess, but Brian talked about screwing Sarah's brains out again soon, to quote the son of a witch." I wanted to cry but wouldn't let the tears form. I couldn't stop the ball of ice from forming in the pit of my stomach. My body felt wooden, as if I were surrounded by massive layers of cotton that deadened every sensation. My chest hurt. I couldn't breathe. Sarah was having sex with some other guy, and I didn't know why. I couldn't think of any reason I'd given her for going outside the marriage for sex, and I didn't know why she would betray me and Mia this way. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. "Anyway, Carl," I said when I had enough control, "that changes our focus. I'm going to call Peter tomorrow morning and start the process of divorcing Sarah. So, I guess what we need now is to get all the evidence we can find." Peter was Peter Robinson, a high-powered lawyer on retainer for MA Industries, and also my personal attorney. "Yeah, Mark," Carl said slowly. I guess there's not much else we can do. He paused. I'm just so sorry, he said. I don't have the words to tell you how sorry I am. His empathy helped some. Yeah, I know, Carl, I replied, my voice a little stronger.
Thank you for watching.
Thanks, partner.
Subscribe
But it's on Sarah's
Deceived
head.
Husbands for
It's
more
no
stories.
one else's fault. But I have a little girl who's going to be devastated. She and I are the victims, and I don't understand why Sarah did this. I focused my attention. I didn't want to play the long-suffering husband beyond this single, maudlin moment. Okay, well, I just wanted you to know. We'll be working in a different direction effective immediately, I told him. I'll see you in the office tomorrow morning. Okay, sure, Mark, Carl agreed. Hey, take it easy tonight, okay? Don't do anything you'll regret, boss, he said earnestly. I knew he was warning me not to do anything to physically harm my wife. I'm okay, Carl, I told him. I ran the tape on this intercept 3 hours ago, and I'm already way beyond that. I hesitated for a moment. I'll tell you, Carl. I won't be sleeping with her tonight or any other night. I'll have to figure out some excuse, but I won't sleep with a woman that stabs me in the back, figuratively or actually. There are things I can do and things I cannot do. I know it'll make the investigation harder, but I just can't. My voice cracked with the final words, but Carl didn't remark on it. That's okay, he said soothingly. It might take a little longer, Mark, but people who are doing these sorts of things always think they're smarter than the rest of us. They're convinced they can keep their adultery hidden from their spouse as well as the rest of the world, and they have no clue what they're doing is predictable and pretty easy to track. I didn't say anything. Well, you hang in there, boss, Carl told me. This will all come out okay, no matter how it gets taken care of. You hear me? You're going to come out the other side of this stronger than you went in. Okay, one way or the other. Yeah, I will, I replied, but I didn't believe it. All I saw was a black hole full of suffering and humiliation ahead for me and Mia. I hadn't even begun to consider all the heartache this was going to cause her. Okay, Mark, call me if you need me for anything, all right? Call me even if it's just to talk. I told him I would. I pressed the off button on my cell phone. I turned the intercept equipment back on to catch any more communications between my dear wife and whoever it was she was screwing. I slept in a guest bedroom down the hall that night, telling Sarah I had a dry throat and some congestion that might make me snore pretty badly. She agreed quickly and without comment. Besides, I told her, it would be closer to Mia if she might need one of us in the night. That our little girl had wet the bed a couple of times last week was news to Sarah, but she shrugged her shoulders and went back to her magazine. What I recognized as an emotional problem our daughter was experiencing made no impression on Sarah. Carl came to me with a preliminary report the next afternoon. Sarah's sex buddy was Brian Wilson, one of the accounting executives at the same firm where Sarah worked. He was one of 3 division supervisors, as was Sarah. He was married and had a boy who was 9 years old and a 7-year-old girl. His wife was Emily, a part-time insurance agent in an office across town. Brian was 40, a little taller than I was but quite a bit slighter. I'd been an amateur boxer in my teens and had gotten into weightlifting to improve my upper body strength and leg stamina. I dropped the boxing when I went to college, but I still lifted a couple of times a week. Mr. Wilson, as he appeared in the one photo Carl had found so far, was more of a runner, if he was an athlete at all. I didn't know what women considered handsome, but I guessed he might be good-looking to the ordinary female, but not exceptionally so. Overall, I wasn't terribly impressed. I wondered what it was about him that would tempt Sarah to disregard our wedding vows so flagrantly and meet this joker for sex. Carl had obtained a full 2-year history of Sarah's phone records, bribing a contact he had with the phone company, and some of his people had gone over them quickly. A first analysis showed that there were initially only a few phone calls between the two, over widely separated occasions. A little less than 6 months ago, the calls had begun to be a weekly event, and eventually a daily one. Now, they were occurring 2 or 3 times a day, usually at night or early in the morning. Carl knew what time I came into work, and he told me unequivocally the two were talking almost every morning after I left the house. The evening calls were almost always initiated by Sarah, and were undoubtedly made when Sarah could be sure I wouldn't overhear. Probably when I was down in the basement lifting weights, while Mia kept me company. The timing was about right for my normal workout periods. Do you have anything you can tell me about what happened around the time the phone calls began to spike? Carl asked. He was being very businesslike about it all, and I appreciated that. It made it marginally easier to deal with from my end. I leaned back in my chair to think, and even propped my feet up on the near corner of my desk. Seeing me relax a little, Carl did the same on the other side of the desk, Suddenly, it came to me. Oh, well, maybe not, I said slowly. She went to a training seminar a couple of weeks before that in Chicago with a company that had hired her firm to audit their financial records. I said uncertainly, remembering more as I thought about it. You know, I stopped while a fragment of a memory coalesced into something I could see in my mind. I took Sarah to the airport for that, I said slowly, and this guy was there too, getting on the same plane. I can remember it clear as a bell. Okay, Carl said confidently. I'll have my folks keep on looking for another nexus, but I think we'll find that the seminar was the beginning of this whole mess. Too many things are pointing toward it. I nodded. I'm not a man who believes in coincidences either, I replied. Carl checked his notepad. That's it for now, boss, he said. We got the credit card issuers to email us digital copies of all the activity for the past year. It helps that you and Sarah have joint accounts on all of them. Oh, that reminds me, he added. We'll be looking at your bank records later today also to see if there's anything there. I'll let you know what we find out. I was impressed by the volume and depth of information that had already been accumulated. They'd only been working on the case for parts of 2 days. How did you get all that without my authorization? I asked, wondering if I really shouldn't pitch a fit with the banks and phone companies about releasing private information so easily. Carl grinned. You authorized all of it, he said. I let my eyebrows rise questioningly. He chuckled. Boss, you've got no idea what you're signing when Maggie puts a stack of paperwork in front of you, huh? I had to smile, and not the grin dropped from my face. I used to say I trusted Maggie almost as much as I did Sarah. Now Maggie had the top slot. Okay, I said, raising my hands in surrender. Go forth and do battle with the bad guys and girls, I told him. By Thursday, Carl and his team had accumulated a massive pile of information about Sarah and her new sex partner. 2 investigators had been dispatched to Chicago, and they'd already turned up a half-dozen people at the company hosting the seminars who remembered Sarah and Brian as being very close. One of the desk clerks, a witness to most of their hijinks, had thought they were married to each other before he noticed their different surnames. Another 3 or 4 people at the hotel where Sarah and Brian stayed recalled them as frequent visitors to the lounge, where they consumed considerable quantities of liquor. Apparently, they would stumble to the elevator and up to one room or the other in the early hours of the morning. The lounge manager had had to ask them to tone down their risque behavior on 2 occasions. Carl's 2 investigators said they were negotiating with the hotel management to see if the security camera tapes from that period were still available and whether they might be obtained for a reasonable fee. Carl told me with a grin that was a euphemism for an under-the-table transfer of tapes for greenbacks. I nodded, understanding that tone of voice. His freelance operative had been called in for a temporary assignment in Sarah's office much earlier than expected, and she was already reporting that Brian and Sarah were an item around the office. Apparently, their mutual boss knew about it too, and he'd admonished them several times to keep their affair out of the workplace. Sarah, it was said, had already lost a merit increase on her salary because of a poor performance report based on her conduct. I marked that in my memory. My attorney would be interested in hearing about a firm that didn't do much of anything to stop clear violations of the morals clauses written into their employees' contracts. The freelancer was working in the payroll section and had already obtained copies of Sarah and Mr. Wilson's pay records, along with time and attendance information. It appeared the dynamic duo was taking off 1 or 2 afternoons a week for a rendezvous. Credit card data Carl obtained from our bank showed where it seemed Brian Wilson was a cheapskate too, because Sarah paid for most of the rooms at an economy motel on the outskirts of town. To me, that signified what a cheap, tasteless little affair this was. They couldn't even get together in a decent downtown hotel. The little group of girlfriends that Sarah said she was meeting when she went out at night was composed primarily of single and recently divorced women, obviously on the prowl for men. Sarah had sworn them to secrecy, but all of them, except for a woman by the name of Kathy, were talking fast and giving lots of details to Carl's investigators. $100 was all it took for most of them to give dates, places, and even approximate times when Sarah and Brian would hook up, as if by accident. Lately, even that fiction had been discarded. Most of the girls hadn't seen Sarah in 2 months. Kathy called Sarah almost immediately and told her about being questioned by a strange man about Sarah's involvement with the group. She maintained the aura that she hadn't spilled the beans even a little bit. Kathy was fit to be tied. She thought it was unreasonable, spiteful, and mean for me to be checking up on her good friend Sarah. She was right when she assumed it was me. I was the logical person to suspect. Of course, Kathy had plenty of experience in such matters. A still incomplete background check on Kathy showed she had been divorced twice. Once because she caught her husband screwing his secretary, and the second time because her new husband caught her with the plumber. For the past few years, Kathy had wandered from man to man. On 2 occasions, she was named as a correspondent in divorce cases where she went out of her way to seduce the husbands. Somehow, this woman had gotten into the same group as Sarah, despite the fact she didn't even work in the same business building as the others. It seemed Kathy was, at least to some extent, encouraging the affair simply because she could. We also knew that, so far, the $100 bribes were holding with the other women because Carl had cloned Sarah's cell phone. The other girls responded to Sarah's panicked calls with assurances, much like Kathy had given her, that they would never give her up. It never occurred to Sarah that all of her friends were protecting her secret. She thought I was behind the investigation. It never occurred to Sarah that all of her friends were protecting her secret. She thought I was behind the investigation. I was astonished at the quantity and quality of the information Carl's operation had developed in such a short time. Of course, Brian and Sarah were rank amateurs, and Carl was the quintessential professional. Brian and Sarah didn't have a chance. The rest of that week and the next 2 were quiet around our home. Sarah had canceled all but Friday night's outing. Carl's agents confirmed the ladies went out to a couple of clubs and danced for a while with pretty much anyone who asked. Everyone went straight home afterward. Brian was a good little boy and stayed home with his wife and children. I read a report that suggested Brian's wife wasn't all that thrilled to have him home, and she'd been very vocal while wondering about his sudden change of habit. I was surprised the effect of the investigators questioning the girls in the little group was so short, but I guess there had to be an element of arrogance in Sarah and Brian's attitude toward me. After all, they'd been going strong for so long. Whatever it was, barely 3 weeks after the investigators contacted the Friday night party, cell phone intercepts began to become more numerous and more explicit. The pair of cheating spouses had decided everything had blown over, and that I had concluded there was nothing going on. During this period, I had almost moved completely into the spare bedroom. I could barely stand to kiss Sarah on the cheek when I came home in the evening, and there was no way I was going to have sex with her. She hinted several times that she was amenable to some hot sex, but I ignored her. I read Mia every book in her little library, and I bought more to go through with her. After I perfected a harsh-sounding dry cough, Sarah didn't question why I was sleeping away from her. She never suggested that I shouldn't be around Mia with a cough like that, though. Anyway, Carl and his crew noted the cell phone conversations between the 2 late at night had increased dramatically. On Wednesday of the 3rd week, Sarah and Brian arranged to meet at their normal cheap motel. Carl had everyone chomping at the bit to get the goods on the adulterers, and Pete, my attorney, had me primed and ready with how to act. I had Mandy, a 16-year-old girl from down the street, ready to babysit Mia that night. Sarah, I said, please don't go out tonight. I was standing in the living room as she was walking out the door. Please, Sarah, I pleaded. I wasn't play-acting. I really didn't want her to meet that son of a witch out there. Mark, Sarah snapped at me, realizing she couldn't leave without attempting to placate me. Her face softened. Look, nothing is going on. I'm just going out for a few drinks and maybe a little dancing. That's all, she said with a butter wouldn't melt in my mouth expression. She came back to hug me and earnestly looked me in the eyes, trying to convince me I was wrong about something I knew for a fact she was going to do. Sarah, I said impulsively, I know you're meeting someone tonight, but you can't possibly mean as much to him as you do to Mia and me. Please, baby, don't go. Sarah pulled back and released me. She was suddenly suspicious. What the hell are you talking about? She asked indignantly. I had to give it to her. She had developed into a fine actress. I just knew. I know, I insisted. I know you're cheating on me with someone. You're cheating on me, and you're cheating on Mia, and it's not fair to either one of us. Sarah relaxed a trifle, her reasoning clearly that if I didn't blurt out a name, all I had was suspicions. I am not cheating on you, she said firmly. I'm getting a little tired of all these accusations, and it's about time they stopped, she admonished me. You keep it up, damn you, and I might just go get some strange man to take care of my needs to show you. I had to look away. I'd blown everything if she'd seen the sudden rage in my eyes. Sarah, I said brokenly. It wasn't difficult. The fury I was feeling was making it hard for me to speak. Not another goddamn word, she said forcefully. I have never, I am not now, and I never will screw another man other than you. There. Does that satisfy you? Angrily, she turned and walked to the door, pulling on a light jacket over her shoulders. I could see she wasn't wearing a bra, and I couldn't see any panty lines on her miniskirt. "Sarah," I said, a little more calmly, "if you ever cheat on me, that ends the marriage. You know that, right? We talked about cheating and what it does to marriages when Georgia and Sam broke up last year. Remember?" For a moment, Sarah's hand didn't move on the doorknob. "I told her. She said it doesn't make sense for you to go on like this. We can work something out, but it needs to stop." Her voice was controlled, but I detected a condescending note in it. "I swear to you, I don't want any man but you, and I never will," she said. "Now I'm late, and I've got to go," she said firmly without even looking back at me. She opened the door and left. 20 minutes later, I joined Carl and 3 of his best people in the room next to where Sarah and Brian would soon be. The little investigation had already reached a tipping point, and I could already feel myself slipping into an abyss. I didn't know how to handle this, but I knew I would have to face it all, eventually. Carl had known of the reservation at the motel a minute or two after it was made because the desk clerk had been paid a couple $100s to call when it happened. Since we knew where they'd wind up, there was no reason to track them. It could have been done, though. If we hadn't known their destination, Carl would have used half a dozen cars to keep pace on parallel streets with Sarah and Brian, with the GPS instruments installed in both of their cars. Neither of the two would ever have seen their followers. After I'd been there a short time, Sarah and Brian drove up almost simultaneously to the motel in their cars and parked in front of room 113. The motel had exterior entrances to all the rooms, and the pair of lovers had only to get out of their vehicles and walk a couple of paces to the door. Neither of them noticed the dark van across the street. They had no idea a high-end digital camera was taping their every move. Sarah and Brian wrapped their arms around each other and kissed deeply while rubbing their bodies all over each other. Carl was watching me closely, knowing I wanted nothing more than to burst out the door and start wreaking havoc. "Mark," he said quietly, "it's going to get a lot worse before it's over. Are you sure you can stand this?" I sat back down on one of the double beds and licked suddenly dry lips. "Do you have anything to drink?" I asked. He misunderstood and shook his head. "No, but I think you should take this Valium," he said, offering me a tiny yellow tablet. "It'll help calm your nerves." I accepted it and then got a soft drink from the cooler that he had, in fact, brought with him. Carl had managed to get one high-end digital camera into the room, hiding it in the air conditioning vent. It was full color, had a full range of motion through an arc of 160 degrees from side to side, and 85 degrees up and down. On top of that, it had a 25x zoom that would isolate one hair in the nostrils of any one of these two. Not that Carl expected any need for that kind of detail. Once the duo went inside, the action started almost immediately. Sarah had not worn any bra or panties, as I had suspected, and was out of her dress in seconds. Brian wasn't far behind. When they fell on the bed, we turned all the lights in our room off, and 2 of Carl's men went out into the night. In addition to the camera and the air conditioning vent, Carl had brought 2 fiber optic snake cameras with him. One was slipped under the door to Sarah's room, and the other over the top of the door. The cameras were less than a quarter inch in diameter and just a couple inches long. They slid easily through the gaps between door and frame, leaving the transmitter and antenna outside. Once the cameras were positioned where the men wanted them, they taped the transmitters to the outside wall in the darkness. The dark-colored spy devices were undetectable from more than a couple feet away. To enhance this, the guys unscrewed the only outside light close enough to illuminate the area before they came back inside. The receivers were already plugged into the monitors and recording equipment, and we settled back for the show. The theory was that what one camera missed, the other 2 would certainly catch. It wasn't much of a show, actually. There was no foreplay, no tenderness, and no affection at all. Brian just slipped on a yellowish-colored condom, mounted my wife in the missionary position, and proceeded to drill away. I watched her face closely for a moment, unsure if it was pain or ecstasy causing the wrinkles on her forehead. "Damn," I said after watching for a minute or two. "That guy isn't any bigger than me. Hell, he isn't anywhere near as big as I am," I protested. "What the hell?" It was true. Sarah had been in a heat to measure me when we first got married and had used a ruler on me a number of times. Sarah figured out from her girlfriends that my size was on the high end of average. She began calling out to me, demanding to be drilled by my big tool when we made love. We hadn't done any of that lately, I guessed. I knew why, but didn't really know why at all. Brian was obviously near the low end of average, and he had to work hard to give Sarah any kind of stimulation. Not only that, the creep had the technique of a hog running in a barnyard. What the hell was Sarah going to this guy for? My pride was partially redeemed a little later. Happily, I caught Sherry, one of Carl's agents, looking at my crotch. A little while later, she glanced up at the TV monitors and shook her head. She smiled. I thought I detected a little speculation in her eyes. We both looked away. She worked for me, and I wasn't about to mess around in my own backyard. She was cute, though. Maybe she wouldn't always work for me. There was an opening coming up for a bedmate soon. After a while, I left. There was nothing more to see. Brian and Sarah would go at it for a time, rest, and do it again. Just what did Sarah see in this bozo? And why was she throwing away 6 years of marriage to have sex with him? The two adulterers didn't meet for a week, and they were both more than a little upset with the world that kept them apart. It seemed their schedules just weren't meshing very well for a change, and they didn't know what to do about it. One day, Kathy came to Sarah with a proposal that she and I go to Las Vegas for the next weekend. The investigating crew had an extensive dossier on Kathy now. They found a mountain of information about her. Kathy, it appeared, was an extremely spiteful woman. Friends knew her as bitter and alienated from her parents and siblings by earlier infidelities. In a phone call neither knew was monitored by Carl's crew, Kathy expanded on her earlier suggestion. She wanted Sarah to tell me that Kathy had won 2 free tickets to Vegas in a call-in contest on the radio and had invited Sarah to go along. It was clear to everyone hearing the tape of the phone call that Kathy was proposing that only she and Sarah take a trip to Sin City. Simply put, the purpose was to get laid as often as possible. She told Sarah she bought 24 condoms and intended to use every one of them. Sarah was won over quickly, but she threw a monkey wrench into Kathy's plans by immediately calling Brian and inviting him along. Kathy sounded unhappy to hear Brian would be joining them there when she heard about it in a later phone call. She made no protest, though I gathered Brian had to pay his own way. He didn't seem to appreciate that much, judging by the snippy nature of his last phone call before departing. I couldn't help but think what a cheap man he was. He actually thought Sarah should pay for his trip out there so he could screw her. Incredible. Pete, my lawyer, told me he was adding Kathy to his list of people to serve with subpoenas. She was well aware, and had been for a long time, that both Sarah and Brian were married. By enticing Sarah to spend the weekend in Vegas, she was acting as a facilitator in the whole nasty mess. Pete didn't think she had any money he could get out of her, and he didn't even think the lawsuit would go very far in the civil courts. But he was going to put the fear of God into her. He said she would never, ever consider helping wreck anyone else's marriage when he was through with her. We discussed whether to stop this thing with just the footage from the motel or wait until the planned Vegas trip. I was inclined to end the intrigue, the lying, and the deceit right now and just initiate divorce proceedings on Sarah immediately. Pete thought we should give them a little more rope to hang themselves, as he put it. The trip outside the state, with all the attendant lies and misrepresentations, would seal their fate. The impact would be especially strong if Sarah showed a particularly egregious lack of respect for her marriage vows. Lawyers talk funny. What he really wanted was to see her way over the line in word or deed. As it happened, he got both. The investigators were in the same casino hotel where Kathy, Brian, and Sarah were staying. They were in one of the 2 towers, while Carl and 5 of his minions were in a room in the other tower, where there was a direct line of sight down into the cheating trio's room. It had cost us $500 for the room clerk to assign Sarah a room on this side of the building, and one that could easily be viewed from where Carl was. Carl's operative said those 5 bills disappeared off the counter faster than I could follow. A few seconds' work on the reservation computer console was all the clerk had to do. He probably thought it was the easiest money he'd ever earned in his life. Only a couple 100 feet away, Sarah's room was visible. The 3 cameras Carl had set up to tape activity in the room across the way were ready. He told me there was a good chance they would have something to record. According to studies he'd seen, people in high-rise buildings instinctively feel their height and apparent distance from other structures gives them a high degree of invisibility. That had been borne out in a number of the cases he'd handled. He said even if they closed the shades, Carl's boys had a laser-based device that could sense the minute vibrations of the window over there or the sounds made by the trio of partiers inside. We'd only have a recording of their voices, no video, but it would be of high enough quality to prove in court who the speakers were. It was something Carl said had been perfected during the Cold War and used by Russian and Western intelligence agencies to spy on each other. The telephone conversation was also going to be taped, of course. I was to call Sarah and make one last attempt on my part to get her to renounce her cheating ways and come home to me. From my attorney's point of view, it was only a prepared script, but I was hoping against hope that it
Thank
might
you for
succeed.
watching.
I could feel hot
Subscribe on
flushes
Deceived
and freezing
Husbands for more
chills chasing
stories.
each other madly about my body, conflicting emotions chasing themselves around my mind in much the same fashion. I didn't know what I was feeling except that I hurt. I was sick to my stomach, though I hadn't eaten anything all day. Carl and his people left me at home, but I had a great view thanks to the cameras they'd set up. A detective following them had watched them almost all the way out to the airport, bringing them little bottles of booze. They were 3 sheets to the wind already. Sarah, I said into the cell phone, watching the webcam feed. I could see Sarah was on her knees and elbows on the bed, being screwed by Brian, who was standing behind her. She had to contort her body and stretch around to reach the phone on the nightstand. Kathy was standing behind Brian and enjoying what she said sharply into her cell phone. She moved away from Brian and Kathy when she heard my voice. Sarah, I said again. Please, honey, don't have sex with that man. I'd almost slipped and said the guy's name. I had to watch it. I wasn't supposed to know his name yet. I couldn't let Sarah know her every move was being covertly watched. Come home to me, babe, please, I pleaded. We can work something out. Please, think of Mia. Think of what ruining our marriage will do to her. It's amazing how long a man will hold out hope, even when he's seeing something beautiful shattered before his eyes. I loved Sarah. I hoped I could see something to give me hope, but there really wasn't any hope. I might love her. I hadn't learned how not to just yet, but I sure didn't like her at all just at this moment. She affirmed that dislike almost immediately. Screw you. Sarah screamed into the phone. I've told you before, you stupid idiot, I am not having sex with anyone, and I've had it with your damn suspicions. I could only shake my head at the duplicity. How in the hell could she say that while she stood naked beside the man who had been screwing her and would be again? When I hung up, I was amazed at the duplicity. She was quiet for a moment. On the TV, I could see she had moved closer to her friends and was watching them go down on each other. But I'll tell you this, sweetheart, she said finally, in a confiding tone. I just might go pick up some a-hole down on the drag tonight and bring him up to my room. How's that, honey? Would you like that? After all, I'll be doing it just so you can be right for once. How would that be, dear? I was astounded by the vindictiveness in her voice. This was the same woman who, only a year ago, wanted to be held all night long after a favorite aunt passed away. I knew Sarah as a soft, comfortable presence in my bed, the person to whom I could turn with any problem and a willing lover when our baby was asleep. Sarah, I said unsteadily, I don't know what else to say. I don't know why you want to screw around with our lives like this. Think of what you're going to do to Mia, for God's sake. Sarah cut me off with another shrill scream. You go to hell and take her with you, Sarah shouted. She was almost incoherent. It was only because I could see her lips on the monitor screen that I could understand what she was yelling. When I get home, you son of a witch, we're going to have this out. Damn you and your damn suspicions. You're going to be lucky if I don't leave your sorry bum. You got that? She screeched some more things I couldn't understand, even with the advantage of being able to watch her lips move. She stabbed at the off button and threw the cell phone at the bed. It bounced off and landed somewhere between the bed and the wall. She staggered over to the bed and motioned for Brian to get back in position. Sunday morning, Carl and the crew dismantled the operation, packed up all the equipment, and shipped it home. Exhausted, they got on a plane and slept all the way home. We literally had more information in the form of videotape, pictures, phone transcripts, and financial analysis than my attorney could handle. The sheer volume overwhelmed Pete, and for a time, he'd be filing the divorce proceedings just before noon on Monday. After that, he'd have 6 months, give or take, to go through the massive material before the state rubber-stamped the obvious and gave me my divorce. One thing we could use immediately was the vivid video of my wife being drilled by a strange man while screaming curses directed at me and our daughter. After assuring me seconds before that she would never do such a thing, that had been obtained by videotaping them through an open window. What I could observe could also be recorded for evidence. To that, we added footage from my home surveillance cameras showing a montage of incidents where Sarah could be heard and seen doing something to show indifference to Mia's welfare. One example of that was the scene at the door the night Sarah went out and Mia came running down the stairs to catch her. Other snippets showed Sarah being short with the child for no reason, and one showed her telling Mia she could get her own breakfast because Sarah didn't have time. All of that was bundled together and put before a judge early Monday morning. She was moved to grant a temporary restraining order, granting me full custodial privileges pending action by the family court system. Another one granted our request to keep Sarah away from Mia until a family court judge had time to review the case. There were several other motions that were granted almost without question. It's wonderful what a wealthy and influential man can get done in a short period. Actually, I was helping that man, my attorney, become even wealthier. Monday morning was never a good time in the accounting firm. There were more than a few hard drinkers among the staff, and of those, some had begun partying Friday night and hadn't quit until Sunday evening. Most of the other personnel dozed at their desks or visited with others around the coffee machine until the drinkers got themselves in hand. When the big man dressed in a gray suit came in from the common area hallway just after the lunch hour, a few hopeful women marked his progress down the aisles, but he seemed to have no interest. He kept glancing at a photograph in his right hand while looking every woman directly in the face. After a few moments' search, he found the woman he was looking for. He planted himself in front of her as she spoke quietly to a tall, distinguished-looking man in his early 40s and a shorter, slighter man who was clinging close to the woman. She wasn't very happy about that and kept trying to slide away from him. Her eyes were dark and troubled. She was forcing herself to pay attention to what her supervisor was saying. "Sarah Davis," the big man asked in a deep, rumbling voice. He came up behind the three without them noticing. The woman turned and nodded. She was not happy today. Something was haunting her, and it showed on her face. She watched as the man took a thick envelope from his inside coat pocket. "You, madam," he said in a booming voice, "are served." He paused for effect, making sure he had everyone's attention. He set his briefcase down on a convenient desk and began taking out legal documents printed on onion skin and backed with a thicker baby blue sheet of paper. "This," he told a stunned Sarah, "is a copy of the petition for divorce filed this morning. It is Mr. Mark Davis's intent to divorce you at the earliest possible moment." He handed her another set of papers. "This, madam, is an order from the court that you not come within 1,000 feet of the residence formerly occupied by you and Mr. Davis." He dropped another set of documents into her hands. "This is a temporary restraining order forbidding you to contact Mr. Davis's daughter, one Mia Davis, for any reason. You may not place a phone call, send an email, a letter, or any other manner attempt to speak to Miss Davis. Is that clear, madam?" he asked. Sarah nodded numbly. She didn't know what else to do. The look of horror on her face was plain to everyone by now. A large crowd was gathering and coming near. "Mr. Davis," the big man, continued, "Mr. Davis wishes that you be informed that all of your joint account credit cards were canceled 2 hours ago. Your joint checking and savings accounts you held with your former husband have also been closed. This represents 50% of the total amount in the former joint accounts." He disdainfully held up a cashier's check by one corner, as if it were contaminated with some nasty substance, before adding it to the stack of paperwork in Sarah's hands. "Mr. Davis further wishes me to inform you that all of your clothing and personal possessions are being packed at this moment and will be loaded into a truck now arriving at your former residence. All of your personal goods will be placed in storage and will be made available to you whenever and wherever you desire. You may communicate your wishes to Mr. Davis's attorney at the numbers shown on this card. You will not be allowed inside the residence you formerly shared with Mr. Davis for any reason, and he wishes me to advise you that the locks have all been replaced and the security codes changed in the residence's security system." The big man looked down at the now crying woman with no sign of pity. He looked around, spying the slender man trying to slip away without notice. "Mr. Wilson," he bellowed, "don't be in such a hurry." Taking another envelope from his briefcase, he slapped it into Brian Wilson's unwilling palm. "You, sir, are served," he remarked. "Congratulations," he said. "You were named as a correspondent in the matter of Davis versus Davis, and you are the respondent in a civil case filed this morning by Mr. Davis for willfully and maliciously interfering in the marriage between Mark Davis and Sarah Davis, and that you have been carrying on a slimy, ugly, sordid little affair with the former Mrs. Davis." Brian looked like he was about to faint and had to hold on to a desk to keep from falling. "My attorney didn't think that this," the big man looked around, seeing Sarah's supervisor, "was the way he would have handled it." The big man made his way to him to serve him with notice of a suit also filed this morning, demanding reimbursement to Mark Davis for failing to enforce the company's morality clauses with all the contracts for mid-level and above employees. A senior vice president, aware of the problem from the start, was also served in the executive offices. Watching from the back of the room, I felt almost nothing. I was cold, my face frozen into harsh, unforgiving planes, I stood silent near the doors through which the process server had entered. I had paid him a healthy extra fee to give Sarah the check and other stuff. It wasn't his job, strictly speaking. I saw a dawning realization of how thoroughly she'd screwed herself spread across Sarah's pretty face when she collapsed on the floor. I turned and left through the big double-wide doors. I watched my soon-to-be ex-wife make her way into the dark-paneled conference room. I was seated at the head of the long table near the windows. The bright sunshine kept my face in shadow, and she had to squint to make sure it was me. I sat in a big executive chair, leaning back and affecting a relaxation I didn't truly feel. I knew I masked it well. I practiced often enough. "I wanted to see you before all the lawyers got at me," Sarah said hesitantly. She pulled out a chair a few paces away and sat down. It had been nearly 4 months since she'd lost her job and gone home to live with her brother. Her brunette hair was almost shoulder length again. She'd cut it when she'd gone to work for the accounting company, thinking it looked smarter and projected an image of the professional woman she was. She was thinner and didn't move very well. She looked like she hadn't been eating or sleeping well. There were dark circles under her eyes. My heart went out to her, but I refused to let any of that show in something this intensely personal. I was wearing my corporate CEO face, something I usually showed only to subordinates and business associates. It was often an implacably ruthless one. And now, "You're here," I said quietly to Sarah. She nodded, looking anywhere but at me. Finally, she couldn't do anything except face me directly. "Mark," she said softly, "I want to start by saying I am so sorry for what I've done to you and to Mia." I didn't say anything. I didn't respond. I was waiting. "I know that isn't adequate, and it doesn't begin to make up for all the hurt I've put you through," she whispered. "But they're the only words I have." She stopped speaking for a long while, and I filled the silence. "I do differ," I said matter-of-factly. "You haven't begun to suffer, Sarah. Not until you have to tell a 3-year-old child that her mother might never come home to be with her." Sarah broke down, sobbing quietly. It had been 4 months since I had to tell her that, and Mia still cried herself to sleep most nights. It was only in the last few weeks that I'd been able to coax a smile out of her once in a while. I paused and watched Sarah double over in her chair as she cried. She screams and attacks anyone trying to hold her back from getting to me if I have to leave her somewhere for an unexpectedly long time. "She's terrified," I said quietly. "Someday I won't come back to get her." Can you imagine what that fear must be like to a little girl, not quite 4 years old, Sarah? Can you? I forced myself to settle back in my seat, while Sarah shuddered through another set of racking sobs. "She's in a new daycare center here at the corporate campus," I told her. "I had to build one so I'd never be more than a few minutes away. Any more than that, and she goes into hysterics when she can't get to me." I watched Sarah cry for a while longer. But on the good side, I said a lot more cheerfully than I felt, "Productivity is way up among the single parents who work here, and it's almost already paid for itself." It made no impression on her. I let the silence build. "Why?" I asked as gently as I could. "Why did you do it, Sarah? I loved you more than life itself, and you ripped the soul right out of me. There's a big empty place inside me now, and I can't even begin to feel it until I know why you did this thing." She only shook her head and let a river of tears flow down her cheeks. I saw she hadn't worn any makeup. She probably anticipated the tears. She was still beautiful, perhaps more beautiful as a mature 30-year-old woman than the girl I'd married. My heart was breaking as I watched her cry. I wanted to give in and cry too. I lost a younger brother in an automobile accident when I was a teenager. I was more miserable today than I was at that time, and I didn't know how to fix things any more than I had then. I didn't know if the ache inside me would ever heal. "This time," she said after a long time, "I don't know why. I think I might be insane or something," she whispered. She was quiet. "I can't understand what I've done, Mark. I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I won't ask for it." Her fingers were twining around each other like serpents. "I want to die when I look back over what all I've done to my sweet baby girl." She stared at the grain and the heavy tabletop directly in front of her. She went on, "When I listened to myself replaying that night in my head, and listened to me scream at you to take her to hell with you." She broke off, tears streaming. "I've hurt the only man I can ever love so terribly bad. I'll have to bear the pain of that for the rest of my life, and I don't know what to do about it." I just stared at her, feeling all the weight of it. I had loved her, without reservation, but love couldn't conquer the deep betrayal I felt. I didn't know what to do now, but one thing was certain: we were on our way to a divorce, and that's what fate had planned for us. It took 6 months, and it was finally over. I didn't stop my ex-wife from visiting Mia, not during the divorce and not after it. Sarah tried multiple times to reconcile, but it was not what I wanted. The ordeal was way too much for me, and I had to get into counseling. It helped me a lot. I reduced my working hours so I could be with Mia. A year later, Sarah left town and married an accountant. Mia was part of the marriage, and I was invited, but I decided not to be part of it. I never married again, and I dedicated my life only to my daughter. Thanks for watching. What do you think? Can trust be rebuilt after betrayal? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.